Orders of the day. Ordre du jour.
Ordre du jour, orders of the day, government orders, government bills, commons. Consideration at second reading of Bill C-66, Expungement of Historically Unjust Convictions Act.
Mr. Sohi for Mr. Goodale, seconded by Mr. Duclos, moves that Bill C-66, an act to establish a procedure for expunging certain historically unjust convictions and to make related amendments to other acts, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. Debate. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And indeed, it's an honour to rise in the House today to speak to Bill C-66. I, along with all members, were in the House for the landmark apology that was offered by the Prime Minister to the LGBTQ2 community. And the apology then was echoed by every party leader in the House, and I think it was an incredibly moving moment. I remember in this House debating same-sex marriage, and I remember how difficult that debate was and how proud I was to support the legislation at the time. And to see how much progress we've made on this issue as a country is indeed very heartening. And I want to say that I was at an event, the Canadian Human Rights Voice hosted an event where they honoured Todd Ross, who was an individual who shared his story, a man who served in the Canadian military with distinction, who as a very young man was forced through lie detector tests to come out to two strangers in a room that he was gay when he hadn't had the opportunity to come out to anybody else, and was forcibly removed from our military. And to hear him share his story and what that apology, not just by our Prime Minister but by every party leader, meant to him, to already see the effects of that apology is so important. But of course, that apology in and of itself is not enough. The Prime Minister's assertion that the injustices will never be repeated again, that we won't make the same mistakes, is essential. And therefore, it is absolutely critical that we work with the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and two-spirit communities to make right past wrongs, but also to ensure that these never happen again. And we're proud of the relationship we have with that community, but we recognize how much work is going to be done, and we think that this bill, Bill C-66, is a critical part of it. I know it's difficult, Mr. Speaker, for many of us to fathom that there was a time in our history where laws allowed a person to be charged, prosecuted, and criminally convicted simply because who they loved. The LGBTQ2 Canadians were humiliated, imprisoned, and saddled with criminal records because of their sexual orientations. They were forced to live with permanent stains on their lives when they had done nothing wrong. That is until now. Bill C-66, the Expungement of Historically Unjust Convictions Act, will create a process to permanently destroy the records of convictions of offences involving consensual activity between same-sex partners that would be lawful today. It will give the Parole Board of Canada justification to order or to refuse expungement of a conviction. It will deem a person convicted of an offence for which expungement is ordered never to have been convicted of that offence. It is very different from other processes that currently exist today. For example, a record suspension or pardon, the purpose of which is to remove barriers to reintegration for former offenders, does not destroy the criminal record. It sets aside for most purposes, but the criminal record can be disclosed or revoked in certain circumstances when public safety is at risk. And record suspensions or pardons cannot be granted posthumously, meaning that those who have died don't get an opportunity to have their name cleared. In contrast, the government fully recognized that those convictions constitute a historic injustice, that they should not be viewed as former offenders. They are not only wrong today, they were wrong then, in violation of our Charter and of their fundamental rights. Their conviction was for an act that should have never been a crime. This expungement process will allow these convictions to be fully and permanently removed from federal databases. For thousands of Canadians impacted, the process will be straightforward. Applying will be free of charge. Those eligible to apply directly can do so to the parole board. In the case of a deceased person, a family member, loved one, or other appropriate representative will be able to apply on their behalf. This is consistent with the recommendation of EGAL Canada's Human Rights Trust. Applicants will need to provide evidence that the conviction meets certain criteria, including that the act was between same-sex individuals, that it was consensual, and that those involved were at least 16 years of age or subject to a close-in-age defense under the Criminal Code. And upon confirmation of a successful application, the record of the conviction can be destroyed. That means once the parole board orders expungement, the RCMP will permanently destroy any record of the conviction in its custody. It will also notify any federal department or agency that, to its knowledge, has any records of the conviction and direct them to do the same. Relevant court and municipal and provincial forces will be notified of the expungement order as well. Mr. Speaker, expungement offers more than a clean criminal record check. It is a recognition that the conviction was unjust and that it should have never occurred in the first place. And it is recognition that it was inconsistent, as I said, with the fundamental rights now protected under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. All of this is not to say that there will be a blanket expungement. Indeed, we want to make sure that we are only catching those who meet the set criteria. Criminal records for individuals convicted of non-consensual sexual activity will continue to be upheld. Applications submitted for an ineligible offense or by an ineligible applicant will also be rejected. Furthermore, an automatic expungement process would be irresponsible, as it could result in the expungement of records for acts that are still criminal. But those eligible will find the process to expunge their record very straightforward. This includes military service members whose offences sometimes were prosecuted under the National Defence Act. That's why we've allowed for a schedule of eligible offences that will apply to convictions under the Criminal Code, as well as to convictions under the National Defence Act. Applications must be for offences listed in the schedule of the Act, and initially this will include buggery, gross indecency, and anal intercourse. But the Act will allow for Governor and Council in future to make other historically unjust convictions eligible for expungement by amending the schedule of eligible offences and, as necessary, criteria through order in council. Given the historic nature of these offences, if court or police records aren't available, sworn statements may be accepted as evidence. It should be noted that anyone attempting to mislead the parole board about a historical offence can be charged with perjury. Mr. Speaker, to put all of this in place, the government has set aside $4 million over 2 years to implement this new process. Proactive outreach will also be undertaken to increase awareness of the initiative, the criteria and the application process among potential applicants. The government will work with federal partners and stakeholders from the LGBTQ2 community to inform potential applicants. It is now incumbent upon us to make sure that happens sooner rather than later. The moment this bill is passed, we can begin accepting applications, which is why I would urge all members to pass this bill as expeditiously as possible. The Parole Board of Canada can begin accepting applications, as I say, as soon as this legislation is brought into force. At the same time, the government introduced this bill. It announced the settlement in the class action lawsuit for actions related to the purge. This will provide up to $145 million to former public servants, military, and RCMP members impacted by state-sponsored systemic oppression and rejection. The agreement in principle also includes a minimum investment of $15 million by the Government of Canada for projects that will record and memorialize those historic events so that we never forget our past, so that we never repeat it again in the future. That includes museum exhibits curated by the Canadian Museum of Human Rights. and it includes a national monument located right here in Ottawa, along with an education package memorializing the historic discrimination against the LGBTQ2 community. As I've mentioned, Mr. Speaker, all of this represents an important step, but not a panacea. Working to create the inclusive and diverse country we want will take sustained effort and collaboration on all our parts. As the Prime Minister noted in his apology, discrimination against the LGBTQ2 communities is not a moment in time, but an ongoing, centuries-old campaign, and we want to be a partner and ally to all LGBTQ2 Canadians in the years going forward. That is why we have been, and we will continue to work hard to address issues impacting lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered, queer, and two-spirit individuals. Mr. Speaker, I'm deeply proud of what the government has accomplished to date and of the work that's still ongoing. Just over a year ago, the Prime Minister named the Honourable Member for Edmonton Centre as a special advisor on LGBTQ2 issues. An LGBTQ2 Secretariat has also been established within the Privy Council to support government initiatives on these issues. With the recent passage of Bill C-16, gender identity and gender expression are now prohibited grounds for discrimination under the Canadian Human Rights Act. Bill C-16 also expands hate propaganda offences in the Criminal Code to protect identifiable groups who are targeted for their gender identity or expression. Another piece of legislation, Bill C-39, has been introduced to repeal Section 159 of the Criminal Code. Work is also underway to develop a long-term vision for blood services that ensures safety and non-discrimination in donation practices. In fact, the Minister of Health was instructed in her mandate letter to work with the provinces and the territories towards that very goal. The government is working towards adopting policies and practices that remove unnecessary collection of gender markers in government forms. We're also working to introduce an X-gender designation on passport applications. This would ensure Canadians who do not identify as either male or female receive the same services and support as everyone else does. The government also plans to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the decriminalization of homosexuality in 2019. It will do so by providing funding for initiatives that increase awareness of the people, actions, and the struggles that led to that milestone. For example, more than $770,000 in federal funding will be provided to the Egal Canada Human Rights Trust to support the Legalizing Love, the Road to June 27, 1969 traveling exhibit project. Mr. Speaker, I'm also proud to note that Canada is actively promoting LGBTQ2 rights on the international stage, including as co-chair of the Equal Rights Coalition. Since 2014, we've provided $2.9 million in funding for projects that support violence prevention programs, awareness campaigns, and advocacy efforts in support of LGBTQ2 communities abroad. These include initiatives aimed to combat homophobia, transphobia, and biphobia in our education systems. Here in Canada, we know that LGBTQ2 youth have a disproportionate high rate of homelessness. According to a 2016 Statistics Canada study, while members of the LGBTQ2 communities make up between 5 and 10% of our population, they represent between 25 and 40% of our homeless youth. A new and unique facility currently under construction in Toronto will be exclusively dedicated to serving this very vulnerable group. The Egal Centre will offer transition and emergency housing, as well as counseling services for homeless LGBTQ2 youth. Last week, the government announced just over $47,800 in federal funding to help improve Egal Centre security. The funding will be used for the installation of security cameras and access control systems. The enhanced security measures will mean a greater peace of mind and a safer, more secure facility for the benefit of Egal Centre residents, staff, and volunteers. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to stand with a government that is committed to protecting the fundamental human rights of Canadians. All people, regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression, must be able to live their lives free of stigma, violence, discrimination, or prejudice. Sadly, as we know, there are times in our history where the prevailing attitudes towards LGBTQ2 issues was very different than today. You could be criminally charged and convicted simply because of your sexual orientation. You could lose your job, your livelihood, and your loved ones, or be barred from serving your country. You could be bullied, ostracized, and made a pariah by your own government. This landmark bill that we are discussing here today is an important and necessary step towards righting the historical discrimination faced by LGBTQ2 Canadians for so many years. It is a key step we are taking, but is only one of many. And it is in the context of a world which calls for equality are slowly being answered. In fact, just yesterday, we know in Australia that the legalization of same-sex marriage occurred. And they joined countries like the UK and Germany and many others. But we remain in a world in which many LGBTQ2 individuals are still forced to live in fear. Fear of being rejected, fear of being hated, fear of facing violence, or even facing death just because of who they love. Sometimes the gaps seem so far apart that they seem like worlds we can't bring together. But as the proverb goes, a river cuts through rock not because of its power, but because of its persistence. The calls for an inclusive world in which diversity can thrive are stronger and more persistent than ever. The apology that we saw given by all the leaders in this House, I think, was demonstrative of that. The fact that we can come together as a House and be able to stand and acknowledge our parts in the wrong in the past, as well as to be able to stand and talk about the future we want, not only for our country, but for all peoples all across the world. That basic human rights, the right as basic and as simple of being able to love the person that you love without fear of reprisal, is something that we can stand for and propagate. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to introduce this bill, and I urge all members to support it expeditiously.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Saskatoon West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Parliamentary Secretary for his comments this morning, and to obviously pledge the NDP support to work quickly to have the bill passed. And like many bills, it's not totally perfect, but we'll move forward. I have one question that I'm hoping the Parliamentary Secretary will be able to give a bit more detail in. You announced some funding to help in rolling out this legislation. I'm wondering if the government is going to look at the fee. Normally the fee with the parole board would be $600, and I'm just wondering if the government is going to be open to reducing that fee to zero, since by no fault of the law was unjust, and people should be able to move forward without having any cost to themselves. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member opposite both for her support and her commitment to work on moving this legislation forward expeditiously. As she knows, the day that we get this legislation adopted is the same day that people can begin the process of being able to make those applications and get their records expunged so that they can move forward with their lives finally free of the stigma of these past convictions. On the question of expungement, expungement will be free. The question of pardons is another matter. We are looking at pardons separately. We're not. This doesn't mean just because we're dealing with expungement that we won't be dealing with pardons. That simply will be dealt with in a separate piece of legislation, at which time we'll be talking about things related to pardons, including the cost of them.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. The honourable member for St. Catharines.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for his speech today and his work on this file over so many years in office in this place. I had a unique perspective, Mr. Speaker, during the apology, is that I had the opportunity to look up into the gallery and see the faces of individuals who had suffered at the hands of their government simply because of who they loved. And to see the faces and to see the power of the apology and the power of those words. But I was wondering if the Parliamentary Secretary could expand on the power of action to back up those words and what this bill does to advance the government, advance this Parliament's position towards the LGBTQ2 community, and is wondering if he could provide comment on that.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for St. Catharines for his question and for his work on this file. I know that it's an area that is very important to him. Certainly, the apology, I think, was powerful for all of us as we sat in our seats and had the opportunity to hear the Prime Minister speak and to hear the other party leaders speak. We had the opportunity not only to witness in the gallery the impact of those words, but in our own communities to talk to people who were really wronged in egregious ways and who had to carry that around. And the feeling of vindication that they had, not only at the apology, but the opportunity to be able to get their records expunged and for that process to be different than other processes. This isn't simply forgiving somebody because time has passed and we're trying to reintegrate them. This is saying to them, this should have never happened to you. And destroying that record is the clearest and most powerful way we can do it. And that's why this bill, I think, is such an important compendium to the apology that we made. But that unto itself is not enough either. We need to go through and look at every single way in any means that we can to ensure that the types of injustices that occurred in the past don't get repeated in the future. And that's why our partnership at a community level, our partnerships ensuring that there are resources available to those people who face discrimination, whether they be in the LGBTQ2 community or whether they be any other Canadian who's facing discrimination, is given the resources to be able to fight back and be able to live a life free from that kind of shadow being cast on them. We would think that would be an easy thing in Canada. We've come a long way, but we still have a long way yet to go. And that's why we don't hold this out as a panacea. There's more that has to be done. I tried to address some of that in my speech, but I think it's an important point the member makes.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Saskatoon West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to ask the Parliamentary Secretary a follow-up question, and I want to pardon my ignorance. I don't come from a legal background. But could he clarify, if you get your criminal record expunged, shouldn't that sort of make you go back to not ever having a criminal record? And if that is not the case, and I'm missing a legal piece that I don't quite understand, if in fact people will then have to also get pardons, I guess I'll ask my question that if there's a cost involved in that process, will the government entertain not charging a fee with that as well? And maybe just enlighten me a bit about the fact that there's maybe two steps to a process that I didn't quite recognize. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question from my honourable colleague opposite. In fact, these are two separate processes. So expungement, just to be very clear, because I think it's an important point, if somebody was convicted of, and we have three offences that are listed here, so you have a buggery, you have anal intercourse, or you have gross indecency. These are convictions that should have never occurred. They are a violation of people's fundamental charter rights. And so we're acknowledging that these are a very different class of offences than any other, because they should have never existed. And so expungement means a complete destruction of those records. They are gone. So once somebody applies for expungement, it is destroyed within their record. It doesn't exist any longer. And it should be noted that that's only available for those offenses where it was between consenting adults, where it was same-sex in nature, where they were 16 years of age, or where there was a close-in-age provision, so that we're really dealing with just those. Now, the RCMP has said that there's about 9,000 on file, but that doesn't mean that that full 9,000 is available for expungement, because some of those might not have been consensual. Some of those individuals might have died, and somebody might not exercise the right posthumously, although it is available for them to expunge it. This is very different, Mr. Speaker, than the process that exists for somebody that's seeking a pardon. Somebody who's seeking a pardon broke a law in Canada. They served their time in whatever fashion that represented, and they want to get that removed from their record. They can't do so permanently, but a pardon allows them as part of the rehabilitation process to receive a pardon, and that means that that it isn't a part of their sort of immediately available criminal record. But if that person was committed an offense that was violently sexual in nature, and there was a check that was done to see, can that person work with a vulnerable population, for example, children, then that record would actually show, even though there was a pardon. So expungement is very different in that regard.
We have time for one more short question and response. Questions and comments. The honourable member for Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd just like to ask my honourable colleague if he could clarify Section 23 of this particular Act. It speaks to the schedule, and subject to the conditions referred to in subsection 2, the Governor General may, by order, add to the schedule any item or portion of an item. I don't exactly know the reference with which that might apply to this. Is it for other offenses or other types of offenses that might occur down the road, or are we only dealing with this particular issue on this particular genre of offense, and it doesn't apply to any other offenses in the years to come should we decide to have something else that we decide to deal with?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the honourable member across the way. The idea here is expungement should be a tool that's used exclusively for righting historical wrongs, for crimes that should have never been considered crimes, that were in fact the violations of people's fundamental rights. And so there are three specific types of crimes that are enumerated in this bill, which I had referenced earlier, which were anal intercourse, which were buggery, on gross indecency, but it does provide for the opportunity to expand that list if it's determined at a future date that other such crimes existed that represented a historic wrong. In other words, should have never been considered crimes and were violation of people's human rights. But we want to, again, keep expungement narrowly limited to that specific type of application.
We're actually out of time there, so perhaps in the next round of questions and comments, the honourable member might be able to make his intervention at that time. Resuming debate, the honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I am pleased to rise in the House today to support Bill C-66, an act to establish a procedure for expunging certain unjust convictions and to make related amendments to other acts. Today, I will be short and sweet because I believe that in this House we do have consensus where all parties do agree that it's important to move forward on this. Mr. Speaker, as I have noted prior, I had the opportunity to speak to Canadians from coast to coast to coast who are part of the LGBTQ2 community. More specifically, I held consultations with several groups and individuals regarding the national apology. From all of the conversations and research that I did, one of the key requests from this community throughout this process was the request to expunge the records of Canadians who had been charged under the Criminal Code. The request to destroy and remove these judicial records would provide individuals their freedom of having their criminal records that have been looming over them for activities gone. I had the opportunity to review this bill with a member from Charles de Laborde, Haut Saint Charles, and from St. Albert Edmonton, following its table. Like any bill, there will be questions to specific sections, but overall, I support the principle of this bill. When reviewing this section of the bill, Section 25 specifically outlines the eligibility for an applicant, including the type of conviction, consent, and age requirements, things that I believe are all very important. I feel that this is perfectly in line and safeguards Canadians from being eligible for offences that are outside of this realm. The proposed schedule of offences would impact all Canadians, including members of the LGBTQ2 community. This is extremely important as it covers the particulars of their offences. For Canadians who do not have a criminal record, it is sometimes hard to realize the negative impacts that has on an individual and their different types of circumstances. Criminal records have an overwhelmingly negative impact on employment opportunities and opportunities for career advancement, for travel to the United States, or for immigration purposes. Canadians with a criminal record can be banned from even entering countries. Now, take into consideration that this group of Canadians that this legislation is targeting is no longer viewed as guilty of a criminal offence. How unfair would it be to allow them to still have a criminal record when we know that this is not a crime. It is a totally life-changing, and I believe that this legislation is doing that just part. As I've indicated, I've had the opportunity to speak to many Canadians on this issue. From all of my consultations, every group and individual made the request to have their records of this criminal convictions expunged. It is truly obvious what needs to be done here. As a parliament, I believe that it's extremely important that legislation that we have in front of us is done, and it gives Canadians a way to move forward. I fully support Bill C-66 and look forward to seeing this legislation passed in order to see those who do not deserve these criminal records so that they finally see some sort of peace. It's one step at a time, and I believe we are in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member opposite for her work on this file, for the work that she's been doing to engage Canadians. I also want to thank her for her unequivocal support and for helping us to move this forward in an expedited way, because it's really only because of all party cooperation that we're able to get this done so quickly, which is particularly appreciated given the fact that there's so much happening as we wrap up and head towards the holidays. I wonder if she has any thoughts around expungement specifically, and how this might impact some of the people that she's been speaking to, what this might mean to them, if she has any stories as she's been holding those consultations that might help illuminate the power of what we're doing today.
The Honourable Member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
I thank you very much. And for any of the viewers today, they're going to probably find that Parliament's not going to be as exciting as they want it to be, because we are all on agreement here. The expungement of these records just opens up the freedom for one to travel, the freedom for one to be able to have a job. You know, for instance, they're doing things that are not seen as crime, but you know, when you go and apply for a job, it shows that they have a criminal record. And you know, things that have been part in the past, it still shows up as a criminal record. So this expungement is extremely important. I'm not a legal guru, but I do understand the impact of this bill. And I understand that, you know, when you're talking to people who say, you know, I can't get a job, it shows that I have a criminal record for this. Or I can't take my kids to Disney World. And we have to recognize that we have many families that just want to travel across the border. It may be for work, it may be for recreation, but they are excluded from travel. So this really just gives them another step towards having a life like every other Canadian should have, an equal life for all. So thank you very much.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for her brief but very heartfelt speech, and I'm very happy to hear that she's supporting this bill. As she and everyone else, I think, here knows, the NDP has been fighting this cause for many years, and we're happy that this bill has come forward at last, and we will obviously be supporting it. We're also pressing that this bill be passed expeditiously so that it can go through the House here before we rise for the Christmas break. And I want to ask the member, not only is she supporting this bill, but will the Conservatives be supporting it, and will they support that expeditious passing of the bill so that this can get done and help these people?
The Honourable Member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And it's because of colleagues from his NDP caucus that I actually have learned so much more. And I'd really like to thank the members from that caucus that I had the ability to work with. You know, for me, this has been life transforming because it really opens up a world of understanding and compassion. I've always been I see myself as compassionate, but understanding more. I think when we're looking at this bill, there is, I think, one particular section that when I spoke to our Deputy Justice critic as well as our Shadow Minister for Public Safety, there was one section of the bill, but it's not specifically to do with the LGBTQ community. It's how can that be expanded. I know that we want to see the rights of any person in this community to be equal. To make sure that they have equal rights, to make sure that they don't have this looming over them. And so I believe as we move forward in committee, there will be that one little section we may have to look at, but it's not going to be a negative impact to that community specifically. So thank you very much. We look forward to working with you on this.
Questions and comments? Resuming debate. The Honourable Member for Saskatoon West.
Thank you, Mr. I'm honored to rise today on behalf of the NDP to support Bill C-66 and its quick passage into law. For me, as a member of the LGBTQ2 community, the government's apology last week was a long-awaited historic moment that paves the way for a more just and a more inclusive Canada for everyone. I feel like I'm walking in the path walked by so many brave and tireless activists throughout the last 50 years. And I also want to acknowledge the important work of former New Democrat MPs like Sven Robinson, Libby Davies, Bill Sitzke, and Greg Scott, who paved the way for great gay and lesbian Canadians in this House. I'd like to pay particular tribute to the work of my colleague, the member for Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke, whose tireless efforts resulted in transgendered and gendered non-binary finally receiving the same protection as rights as all other Canadians. Last week's apology from the Prime Minister on behalf of the Government of Canada was a very emotional day for many Canadians, as well for me, Mr. Speaker. Even as we celebrated the moment and looked forward to the righting of past injustices, the day also inevitably revived some darker memories of what Canadians have suffered. In 1965, Everett Clippard from Saskatchewan became the last Canadian to be in jail because he was gay. He was declared a dangerous sexual offender and was sentenced to life in prison in 1966. The Supreme Court of Canada upheld his conviction until he was released in 1971, 2 years after then Justice Minister Pierre Trudeau's bill legalized consensual homosexual acts. Journalist John Ibbitson, who profiled Clippard, recently said in an interview, and I quote, "He didn't see himself as a pioneer in gay rights movement. He was just a guy who loved driving trucks and, as it turned out, loved men as well." Everett was merely the last Canadian to have been in prison for whom he loved. There are countless Canadians whose lives have been shattered and altered immeasurably because they were persecuted for who they are. And while the apology is welcomed and the right thing to do, there are many for whom it has come too late. It came too late for Everett Clippard. Every change, every advancement in law, every protection of basic human rights enshrined into law and policy for members of the LGBTQ2 community has been achieved by dragging governments and public institutions kicking and screaming to do the right thing. Let us hope those days are over and that today is the day we commit as a parliament to end all state-sanctioned discrimination and begin the long overdue restoration of justice to its victims. Let us hope that indeed, as the headline for former NDP MP Sven Robinson's opinion piece in the Globe and Mail states, and I quote, "For the countless Canadians humiliated by anti-gay policies, healing can finally begin." Thanks to activists and allies here in Canada, we have seen a gradual shift away from persecution and unjust punishment and a slow but unstoppable recognition of rights for LGBTQ2 people. And I wanted to share a brief timeline. In 1969, homosexuality ceased to be a crime in Canada, but it still took 2 more years before Everett Clippard was released from jail. In 1975, Doug Wilson, a graduate student in the College of Education at the University of Saskatchewan, was refused by the Dean of College of Education to supervise practice teachers in the school system because he was a gay activist. The Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission dismissed his case of discrimination. In December 1977, Quebec included sexual orientation in its Human Rights Code, making it the first province in Canada to pass a gay civil rights law. By 2001, all provinces and territories had taken this step forward. In 1978, Canada's new Immigration Act removed homosexuals from the list of inadmissible classes. In 1979, the Canadian Human Rights Commission recommends in its annual report that sexual orientation be added to the Canadian Human Rights Act. The following year, MP Pat Carney tabled the bill C-242, which would prohibit discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation. It doesn't pass. And NDP MP Sven Robinson introduces similar bills in 1983, in 1985, in 1986, in 1989, and 1991. In 1991, Robinson tried to get the definition of spouse in the Income Tax Act and the Canada Pension Act to include or of the same sex. In 1992, he tried to get the word opposite sex definition of spouse removed from Bill C-55, which would add the definition to survivor benefit provisions of federal pension legislation. All the proposed bills were defeated. In 1987, Don Cochrane, a professor of education at the University of Saskatchewan, organizes the first Breaking the Silence conference to discuss gay and lesbian issues in the education system. That year, the conference actually celebrated its 30th year this year, but that year, the organizers had to hire security to protect attendees from physical and verbal harassment and abuse from protesters. In 1988, Sven Robinson becomes the first member of Parliament to come out. Robinson was first elected to the House of Commons in 1979, and in 2000, the BC riding of Burnaby Douglas, as it was called then, elected him for the 8th time. Mr. Speaker, in 1991, Delvin Ferrand, a lab instructor at Kingston University College in Edmonton, Alberta, is fired from his job because he is gay. The Alberta Human Rights Commission refuses to investigate the case because the Alberta Individual Rights Protection Act does not cover discrimination based on sexual orientation. 7 years later, after being fired for being gay, the case goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and finally, on April 2, 1998, the High Court unanimously rules that the exclusion of homosexuals from Alberta's Individual Rights Protection Act is a violation of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Also that year, in my community, Gay and Lesbian Health Services in Saskatoon, now called Out Saskatoon, opened its doors, thanks to the sheer determination and tenacity of Jens Hellquist. GLHS was started to serve the underserved health, social, and emotional needs of gays and lesbians in Saskatchewan. In August 1992, in Hague-Birch versus Canada, the Ontario Court of Appeal rules that the failure to include sexual orientation in the Canadian Human Rights Act is discriminatory. Federal Justice Minister Kim Campbell responds to the decision by announcing the government would take the necessary steps to include sexual orientation in the Canadian Human Rights Act. In November 1992, after a landmark legal challenge was won by Michelle Douglas, who was fired from the military for being a lesbian in 1989. The federal courts finally lifted in 1992 the country's ban on homosexuals in the military, and that year, for the first time, allowed gays and lesbians to serve with pride in the armed forces. In May 1995, the Supreme Court ruled on the case involving Jim Egan and Jack Nesbitt, two gay men who sued Ottawa for the right to claim a spousal pension under the Old Age Security Act. The court ruled against Egan and Nesbitt. However, all 9 judges agreed that sexual orientation is a protected ground. May 1995, an Ontario judge finds that the Child and Family Services Act of Ontario infringes Section 15 of the Charter by not allowing same-sex couples to bring joint application for adoption. Ontario became the first province to make it legal for same-sex couples to adopt. British Columbia, Alberta, and Nova Scotia followed quickly after. In 1996, the federal government finally passes Bill C-33 and adds sexual orientation to the Canadian Human Rights Act. In 1999 of May, the Supreme Court of Canada rules same-sex couples should have the same benefits and obligations as opposite-sex common-law couples and equal access to benefits from social programs to which they contribute. And in June of that year, although many laws will have to be revised to comply with the Supreme Court's ruling in May, Parliament votes 216 to 55 in favor of preserving the definition of marriage as a union of a man and a woman. In the year 2000, in February, Prime Minister Jean Chrétien's Liberals introduced Bill C-23, the Modernization of Benefits and Obligations Act, in response to the Supreme Court's May ruling. The Act would give same-sex couples who have lived together for more than a year the same benefits and obligations as all common-law couples. On April 11, 2000, Parliament passes Bill C-23, with a vote of 174 to 72. The legislation gives same-sex couples the same social and tax benefits as all couples. In total, the bill affected over 68 federal statutes relating to a wide range of issues: pension benefits, old age security, income tax deduction, bankruptcy protection, and the criminal code. Despite this, the definitions of marriage and spouse are left untouched. On December 10th in the year 2000, Reverend Brent Hawkes of the Metropolitan Community Church in Toronto reads the first banns, an old Christian tradition of publishing or giving public notice of people's intent to marry for two same-sex couples. Hawkes says that if the banns are read on 3 Sundays before the wedding, he can legally marry the couple. The two same-sex couples are married on January 14, 2001. The following day, the Ontario government reiterates the government's position, saying the marriages will not be legally recognized. The year 2000 was also the year that in Saskatoon, Mount Royal High School teacher Patty Rowley attended a session at a school board convention by Gay and Lesbian Health Services. A year later, she started the Gay Straight Alliance in a high school in Saskatoon at Mount Royal Collegiate. She has been facilitating a weekly meeting for students and teachers ever since, 22 years later. In May of 2002, the Ontario Supreme Court Justice Robert McKinnon rules that a gay student has the right to take his boyfriend to the prom. And in July 2002, for the very first time, a Canadian court rules in favor of recognizing same-sex marriages under the law. The Ontario Superior Court rules that prohibiting gay couples from marrying is unconstitutional and violates the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. In February of 2003, MP Sven Robinson unveils a private member's bill that would allow same-sex marriages. The federal government has already changed several laws to give same-sex couples the same benefits and obligations as heterosexual common law couples. In June of that year, the Ontario Court of Appeal upholds a lower court ruling to legally allow same-sex marriages. And I quote here from the judgment, "The existing common law definition of marriage violates the couple's equality rights on the basis of sexual orientation." In June 2003, the Ontario government announces that the province will finally obey the law and register same-sex marriages. Nearly 24 couples apply for marriage licenses in Ontario the following day. In August 2003, Prime Minister Jean Chrétien vows not to let religious objections alter his stand on same-sex marriage. He says members of Parliament will be allowed to vote freely on the bill when it's introduced into the House of Commons after his retirement in 2004. In December of 2003, the Ontario Court rules that Ottawa has discriminated against same-sex couples by denying benefit to their partners who had died before 1998, and the court rules that benefits will be retroactive to April 17, 1985, when equality rights in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms came into effect. In December 2004, the Supreme Court of Canada rules that the federal government can change the definition of marriage to include same-sex couples. In February of 2005, the federal government finally introduces its same-sex marriage bill in the House of Commons. The bill, if passed, would give married same-sex partners the same legal protection as other married couples. And in the May of that year, a Canadian Forces sergeant and a warrant officer are married in the chapel at CFB Greenwood, Nova Scotia, in the military's very first gay wedding. In June of 2005, the controversial Bill C-38, titled Law on Civil Marriage, passes final reading in the House of Commons, sailing through with a vote of 158 to 133. On July 20th, 2005, the bill becomes law, and Canada is the 4th country in the world, after the Netherlands, Belgium, and Spain, to finally and officially recognize same-sex marriage. So you can see, Mr. Speaker, the road to the apology has been strewn with obstacles, and the struggle and the resistance has been real and unrelenting, and each battle has been fought multiple times in multiple jurisdictions. And while governments, parliaments, police services, and other institutions created to protect people continue to persecute and prosecute LGBTQ Canadians, brave and courageous souls made change, positive change, despite governments, one person, one family, one community at a time, and they saved people's lives. And while the apology sadly came too late for some of these brave people, it does represent a much brighter future for those who remain. Mr. Speaker, the apology is the proper first step, and we applaud the government for taking it. New Democrats have been unwavering in calling for a just apology, and we are pleased that the government has announced that it is including redress measures in this bill, as an apology without any redress measures would have been just an apology, not a just apology. Mr. Speaker, there are thousands of people with unjust historic convictions for consensual same-sex sexual activity still on their records, and these convictions continue to be a barrier for people when it comes to travel, to volunteer, even to get a job. New Democrats have fought to make sure expungement legislation was tabled at the same time as the apology, and we are committed to working together with all parliamentarians and government to get this legislation passed as soon as possible. By expunging the convictions for historic consensual same-sexual activity, the government is ensuring that no unfairly applied discriminatory label or judgment can continue to have negative impacts on people's daily lives. So while this Bill C-66 is not perfect, we believe that all the issues in question are fixable without amending the bill and therefore should not cause delay in the passage of the bill. Mr. Speaker, New Democrats would like to see the immediate implementation of a process for the expungement of criminal records for consensual same-sex sexual activity. Speedy follow-through on a redress measures is necessary to complete and validate the government apology. And now that Bill C-66 is tabled, we want to also make sure the government continues, make sure that Canadian Force Service records are revised, quickly move on the tabled legislation to repeal Section 159 of the Criminal Code, and of course finally end the blood ban for men who have sex with men. And in closing, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank those who went before us, as well as everyone who continues to work towards a more inclusive and equal Canada. There remains, unfortunately, lots still to do. Mr. Speaker, I chose to be a member of Parliament for Saskatoon West and to run. My goal was to end homelessness. As we heard the Parliamentary Secretary mention, LGBTQ youth are overrepresented in youth homelessness in this country. It is estimated that between 25 and 40% of homeless youth identify as LGBTQ2. These young people are more vulnerable or at a higher risk of homelessness because of homophobia and transphobia. LGBTQ youth leave home most often because of violence and abuse. Their home is not safe for them. They often choose to live literally on the street because they face homophobia and transphobia in our shelter systems and in support services. So despite human rights legislation, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, legalizing same-sex marriage, homophobia and transphobia are still very much a part of our daily life in Canada, in our language, in our behaviour, and in the policies and practices of many of our helping institutions. In the timeline I shared today, I highlighted important Canadian firsts that took place in my home province of Saskatchewan, important milestones that have improved the lives of LGBTQ2 Canadians. I'd like to end my remarks on one final first. This fall, the first long-term LGBTQ2 youth home in Canada, Pride Home, was opened in my riding. The youth home is operated by the amazing organization Out Saskatoon. In 2016, the survey by Out Saskatoon found that 40% of the local LGBTQ2 youth had dealt with homeless at some point in their life, in their short life. Mr. Speaker, I know we all hope for the day that all LGBTQ2 youth, I think we would say all youth, have a warm and supportive, loving home. But until then, thank goodness for organizations like Out Saskatoon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Development and La Francophonie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my honourable colleague for her remarks. Mr. Speaker, over the last little while, subsequent to the apology, we've seen Maclean's reports with Lucy LaPearl talking about how important and poignant the apology was for her as a recognition of what she has been through and the trauma that she had over her life. In fact, she stood in the gallery, and as we watched the Prime Minister give this apology and watched Lucy in the gallery, it was really a powerful moment. Can the honourable member tell us what this apology means, not just for today, but for future generations of Canadians in this country?
Honourable Member for Saskatoon West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my honourable colleague for sharing those comments. And I think I had hoped I organized a viewing of the government's apology for young people in my riding. Of course, I was here in Ottawa and I wasn't in Saskatoon, and so I am looking forward to going home to see what their view is. They're very young. They're looking forward. Some of the things that came up during the apology, both by the government and the other parliamentary leaders, probably told them about things that they may never have known. So I think, I think an apology is an important first step. It starts a process, and I think in my comments I mentioned it's very important to move very quickly on this legislation. We don't want, and I don't think anybody in this House wants, just an apology. We want an apology that has redress as far as it can go. No one can go back and sort of have everything restored. But it is important that we cooperate across party lines, move as many pieces of legislation forward as soon as possible, hopefully before we go home for Christmas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
There will be 8 minutes remaining in the time for questions and comments to the member for Saskatoon West when the House next resumes debate on the questions. But now we're going to statements by members. Déclaration de député. The Honourable Member for St. Catharines.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Great Holiday Food Drive is an important annual event in St. Catharines that aims to stock our local food bank heading into the holidays. Demand is high, and volunteers from throughout the community will pack the front lawn of City Hall with generous donations from residents. Our government has made great strides by putting forward policies that aim to reduce poverty, ranging from our recently announced affordable housing strategy to the Canada Child Benefit. My hope is that one day we will no longer see the need for community food banks. However, until that day comes, I commend organizations like Community Care of St. Catharines and Thorold and their Executive Director, Betty Lou Suter, on the amazing work they do to help those in need throughout St. Catharines. To Betty Lou, her staff, and all the volunteers involved and those who have donated, thank you for all that you're doing to remind residents, I want to take the time to remind residents, and I know Betty Lou would want me to do that there's still time to donate. Merry Christmas. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Beauport-Côte de Beaupré, Île d'Orléans, Charlevoix. Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, I attended the Senate 150th Anniversary Medal ceremony. This medal was created by a special Senate committee to honour Canadian men and women or organizations that make contributions through their generosity, their extraordinary dedication, and that has often gone unnoticed. I'd like to congratulate the Côte de Beaupré Optimist Club that supports families in financial difficulty and helps children remain involved in their community to foster their development. I also want to congratulate the Charlevoix Ressources Genesis organization, whose mission it is to support the rehabilitation of individuals dealing with addictions to, for example, alcohol, drugs, gambling, or online addictions, and who also support the families of these individuals. Their presence at the Charlevoix Casino as a prevention resource is also much appreciated. I am very proud of these two organizations from my riding for this well-deserved honor. Merry Christmas to all.
excusez-moi. Alors, juste un moment. L'interprétation ne fonctionne pas? No. L'interprétation.
Interpretation? Is the interpretation working? Go ahead.
For Essex to perhaps start all over again. We've got a few seconds in there we can save, and we'll start again, this time with interpretation. The Honourable Member for Essex.
Today I rise in this House deeply saddened by the loss of a dear friend and community hero, Tom Robson. Tom was a World War II veteran who died yesterday at the age of 94, and he will be so deeply missed. Tom joined the Navy in Windsor on May 6, 1941, and fought in the Battle of Madagascar, defending ports in South Africa, Malta, Sri Lanka, Mumbai, Kolkata, and many more in the Indian Ocean. He spoke of the war matter-of-factly. He once told me we were deep in enemy territory, laying mines and water laced with enemy traps, with U-boats traveling beneath us and air bombers flying over top of us. After the war ended, Tom was discharged and returned to Windsor to reunite with his family. He knew the importance of community, setting an example for all through his service in the Royal Canadian Legion, Branch 201, and the Knights of Columbus. Tom volunteered with the St. Vincent de Paul and the Essex Food Bank and drove cancer patients to and from their treatments and appointments. The people of Essex honored Tom's service last month at a dinner I attended where he was named 2017 Essex Citizen of the Year. Tom, thank you for your kindness, selflessness, courage, strength, and friendship. You will be missed by all.
The Honourable Member for Orleans.
Mr. Speaker, some 1.7 million Canadian families still do not have a home that meets their basic needs. This is unacceptable. In a country as successful and prosperous as Canada, everyone should have a roof over their heads.
The Minister of Families, Children and Social Development and the Member of Parliament for Spadina for York, our government took a big step towards achieving this goal with the first ever national housing strategy.
Over the next 10 years, this strategy will remove 530,000 families from housing need and cut chronic homelessness in half.
I met with local stakeholders from the Emily Murphy Nonprofit Housing, the Cumberland Housing Corporation, the Orleans Cumberland Resource Centre, Habitat for Humanity Ottawa, and Place Perrot to discuss how the new Canada Housing Benefit will ensure stability for those Orleans residents struggling with basic costs of housing. Mr. Speaker, we're all excited about the benefits of this strategy. We're excited at the benefits it will bring to the community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Oshawa.
Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government left Canadians in the cold. Pension bills and ethical ills, they all deserve some coal. Balanced budgets are a fairy tale, they say. Canadians know as deficits grow, our kids will pay someday. He led them down Ottawa town right to the ethics cop. When she saw numbered companies, she ordered them to stop. This Liberal government is deceitful as can be. Expect to pay each and every day as long as it's you, not me. Stumbling, stump, stump, stumbling, stump, stump, promises just for show. Bumbling, bump, bump, bumbling, bump, bump, where did our money go? Merry Christmas, everyone. Joyeux Noël.
Merry Christmas. The Honourable Member for Ville-Marie, Le Sud-Ouest, Île-des-Sœurs.
Mr. Speaker, they've got 10 years to get that song right. Whether skating in the Old Port, shopping at the Atwater Market, or attending a Christmas concert at Notre Dame Basilica, Montreal is a picturesque place to spend the holidays.
Last year, Montreal wanted to add tallest Christmas tree in Canada to its list of attractions, a tree rivaling the famous tree at the Rockefeller Center in New York.
Alas, the 88-foot tree that arrived, though undoubtedly iconic, did not quite live up to the hype. Described by some as ugly, skinny, and lopsided, images of Montreal's ugly tree quickly spread. But like Charlie Brown and his friends, our city learned to love its ugly tree.
Montreal loved its ugly tree so much that it's back, this year in the shape of a lopsided Schtroumpf hat, at the center of the Christmas village called Le Village du Vilain Sapin. Mr. Speaker, the ugly tree is becoming a real tradition in Montreal.
Mr. Speaker, about the tree and Christmas, and for that matter, this MP, is that the true beauty is on the inside. I know it's early. C'est tout. Joyeux Noël à tous et à toutes.
Merry Christmas to all. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, poverty is often closer than one may think. Approximately 10% of families in Quebec live below the poverty line. Approximately 4 million Canadians are experiencing food insecurity. The food drives taking place on street corners, in your grocery stores, and throughout Canada are an extraordinary source of comfort for those in need. In order to make sure that every family has enough to eat over the holidays, we must come together to collect enough non-perishables and food during the holidays as well as the following months. January and February are critical months for most food banks. I'd like to thank the Complexe Le Partage, the Corne d'Abondance, and all those community organizations working to alleviate poverty. I would invite all my colleagues and all Canadians to generously contribute to your local food drives. Your contribution makes a difference, so if you can, please give. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, last week, an institution in the riding of Louis Saint Laurent received national recognition. Tourisme Wendake was awarded the prestigious Canadian Cultural Tourism Award from the Tourism Industry Association of Canada. As you know, Wendake is in the heart of my riding, and Wendats are proud, successful, and accomplished people. And there are many tourist attractions, whether it be the Museum Hotel, the Longhouse, recreated village, crafts, quality tables, the Saint Charles River, or the Kabir Kuba waterfalls, where I'll be tomorrow. That is why so many foreigners come to Quebec and travel to Wendake. There is so much to gain by discovering the wealth of cultures in our communities. Bravo to First Nations, bravo to Wendake Tourism for this well-deserved national award.
The Honourable Member for Spadina, Fort York.
Mr. Speaker, the child poverty rate in Toronto is amongst the highest in the country. And to put this in perspective, there are more poor kids living in my city than there are any number of constituents and any MPs riding in this House. Half the people tonight who go to sleep in the Toronto Emergency Shelter will be children. This number doesn't include youth in care, doesn't include young offenders in custody, because effectively those people are also homeless. We've delivered our country's first ever national housing strategy, the largest and longest investment in housing in this country's history, but we cannot end homeless if we don't focus on young people and tackle youth homelessness. We must and we will. Indigenous youth, racialized youngsters, queer kids, foster kids, young adults with disabilities are strong and resilient, but our systems are breaking these children and projecting them into homelessness and projecting them onto the streets. I ask all of Parliament, I ask Canadians everywhere to build a better future for these children by building housing now. Give them a safe and secure place to call home. It starts with housing. It has to happen sooner than later. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Bay of Quinte.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to spotlight a few organizations in my riding, the Bay of Quinte, that serve our community with very special holiday programs. To date, the Gleaners Food Bank and Christmas Sharing Program helped over 1,300 families enjoy nutritious and tasty food with a holiday basket. The Salvation Army Coats for Folks program gave out more than 760 clothing items for winter. Trenton's VON's Christmas for Seniors program connected volunteers with seniors who needed assistance with holiday shopping or preparations. And toy drives by Belleville's professional firefighters or the Quinte West Kinsmans helped over 700 families provide holiday gifts for their children. I remind each of my honourable colleagues and all Canadians that the needs of our most vulnerable community members don't disappear when the holiday season ends. Please stay generous all year long. Whether it's food, funds, or volunteering, time, our donation, no matter how small, can make all the difference. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Have a happy holiday.
The Honourable Member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes Brock.
Mr. Speaker, Canada and Norway are celebrating 75 years of diplomatic relations, which began in 1942 at the height of the struggle against fascist tyranny in World War II. After the war, Canada and Norway continued building on their bilateral relationship as new threats to international peace and stability emerged. Canada and Norway would once again stand shoulder to shoulder as strong partners under the NATO alliance. As NATO allies and multinational partners, we enjoy cooperation on a regional and global security issue basis. We are like-minded on issues such as arms control and disarmament, war-affected children, gender equality, human rights, and defending the fundamental rights and freedoms that the free peoples of our two nations cherish. We also share a special bond over the protection and preservation of the Arctic. There's lots of Norway in Canada, Speaker. Nearly 500,000 Canadians draw their heritage from the land of the midnight sun. There are 73 Norwegian and Norwegian-affiliated companies operating in Canada, employing thousands. Colleagues, please join me in thanking our Norwegian friends and allies.
The honourable member for Canada Carleton.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity to reflect on the inspirational volunteers that I've met in my riding of Canada Carleton this year. I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say that our work would be impossible without the hard work of volunteers. I want to say thank you to the countless volunteers from across the region who came out to the riding during the floods in Constance Bay and West Carleton. They carried sandbags, they cooked food, and they helped their neighbours in need. Thank you to the volunteers at the Canada Food Cupboard and the West Carleton Food Access Centre who are making sure that everyone has a Christmas meal this holiday season. These amazing volunteers have brought our communities closer together, inspiring neighbours to help neighbours in the true holiday spirit of selflessness and compassion. To all of the volunteers in Canada Carleton and indeed across the country, I say thank you. Keep up the wonderful work, and may your holidays be filled with much joy, peace, and love. Thank you.
The honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Mr. Speaker, a few days ago, Mr. André Ashgagnon died. He was a businessman, a man with a big heart, and a great philanthropist who left his mark on my riding. Aside from managing and growing many Rona hardware stores, André Ashgagnon chaired the Rona Group board. André Gagnon deeply loved Saint-Hyacinthe and showed this by, among other things, supporting approximately 250 causes every year. When he deemed it necessary, he expressed his opinions publicly. They were always thoughtful, and their purpose was to inform community debate on specific issues. His actions and his positions were always inspired by love, family, friendship, determination, justice, sharing, and hard work. He was and will remain for us a great inspiration. We all salute the memory of this great Mascoutin man.
The honourable member for Barrie Innisfil.
Mr. Speaker, this week the Memorial Cup was here on Parliament Hill. It's been 17 years since the Barrie Colts were finalists, and their loyal fan base is hopeful the Colts will be back this year in Regina for the 100th anniversary of the Cup. I will, however, admit to being somewhat conflicted, Mr. Speaker, because my son plays for the member from Oshawa's team, the Generals, so I cheer mightily for both teams. Mr. Speaker, my second annual family skate at the home of the Colts, the Barrie Molson Centre, takes place on Saturday, December 23rd from 2:30 to 3:30 p.m. Admission is free, and again this year, I'm asking skaters to think of those less fortunate in our community and bring along non-perishable food items to support local food banks. It will be a great afternoon to lace up the skates, enjoy a cup of hot chocolate while having fun helping others in our community. I'd like to take this opportunity to wish my colleagues in this House and all of the residents of Barrie Innisfil a very Merry Christmas and a happy and prosperous 2018.
The honourable member for Cape Breton, Canso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Flags have flown at half-mast this week in Mi'kmaq communities across Atlantic Canada with the passing of Grand Chief Ben Siliboy. The Grand Chief was first appointed to represent his community as captain to the Grand Council in 1968. He went on to serve as Grand Council Chief for 26 years. He served on a multitude of local, regional, and national boards that promoted the Mi'kmaq language and traditional knowledge of his people. A residential school survivor, his contribution to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was both profound and inspiring. One of his greatest accomplishments was leading the charge to establish Maui Damk, a home for adults in his community with intellectual disabilities. Chief Rod Gugu of Wakaba said, and I quote, "He was not just great for our race, he was great for the human race," end quote. To his wife Marie and his daughters Michelle and Christina, our heartfelt sympathies. Know that Ben's wisdom, his guidance, and his faith will live with us for years to come.
Questions orales, oral questions. The honourable member for Carleton.
Hey!
5 months ago, the finance minister told local businesses he would impose a reasonableness test to determine what they were allowed to pay to contributing family members as part of the business. Now, 3 weeks before that so-called reasonableness test will take effect, nobody has any idea what it means. There are no written legislation, there are no written rules, but businesses are now scrambling right before the Christmas break to determine what the laws will be. How is that reasonable?
Honourable Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to reassure the member the details will be known very shortly. And I also want to highlight what the Finance Minister has also announced, which is a reduction in the small business tax rate from 10.5% to 9%, which will represent on average $1,600 per business, per small business in Canada, and up to a maximum of $7,500 so they can invest in innovation, in hiring workers. That's because we believe in the importance of small businesses across the country to contribute to Canada's prosperity, and we are very proud of our small businesses. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Carleton.
Well, the small business tax rate was already set for 9% when this finance minister took office. He then raised it back up to 10.5%. We're happy that due to the unrelenting pressure of the official opposition, he is back down from that. Mr. Speaker, now small businesses are expected to have faith in this government's idea of reasonable. Reasonable to them is raising taxes on people with diabetes, on waitresses enjoying a small sandwich during their break, on autistic people, on farmers, and on small businesses. How can this government expect small businesses to have faith that the government will be reasonable in their treatment of family compensation?
Honourable Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Quite to the contrary, we lowered taxes for small businesses from 11 to 10.5 and now to 9% by 2019 because we recognize the importance of small businesses in Canada. We will always be behind our entrepreneurs, and what's reasonable, Mr. Speaker, was to do the investments we've made in infrastructure, was to go forward with the Canada Child Benefit that's contributed, Mr. Speaker, to more growth in this country in the last 2 years than they ever could achieve in 10 years, and that's good for small businesses.
Honourable member for Carleton.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the finance minister appears unable to stand up and answer basic questions about a plan that he will impose in just 3 weeks. It's not just that this finance minister owned shares in a company he regulated, or introduced a pension bill while having ownership in a pension company, or sold shares just a week before market-moving tax measures. All of those things were ethical lapses and failures, but because he's up to his eyeballs in these troubles, he is unable to do his job, which is to answer questions and tell people what the rules will be. If he can't do the work of a finance minister, why won't he step aside and let someone else do it for him?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recognize this is Friday, and the member for Carleton is sometimes a bit careless with facts. When we talk about the measure announced on December 7, Mr. Speaker, it was not deemed market-moving. And let me remind you, Mr. Speaker, and the Canadians listening, that the measure we introduced on December 7, 2015, was to raise taxes on the wealthiest 1%, to lower them for 9 million Canadians. And for the people at home who are watching this, for the middle-class Canadians, it's $670,000 plus per year on average. And it's also for a couple, it's $1,340 more in their pockets because we recognize that a prosperous and successful middle class is good for Canada.
Deputy Louis Saint-Laurent.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint-Laurent. Mr. Speaker, after a period question, I'd like to verify whether the affirmations of the Parliamentary Secretary. What we know and what business people know is that on January 1st, there will be new tax measures. It's been, they only have 3 weeks, business people. Every day that passes is one day less. When will the government tell us what these tax measures will be? So we can debate it here in the House. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I can reassure my colleague that the measures and details will be tabled very shortly. It will be made public for small business owners. And I'd like to remind him of the purpose of these tax measures. It's to create more tax fairness so that people in Canada can save money, can pay less taxes. These taxes will be fair and equitable for all Canadians. The Honourable Member, well, every day that passes is one day less to get prepared for these measures. I think that we'll at least have them next week so we can debate them in the House. Now, let's remember the sad memory about what this government did on the 18th of July. There were increases in tax of up to 73%. So now there are a lot of people who have to pay more money for transferring businesses to their family members. They need to be able to prepare as is their right. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Mr. Speaker, we will make these details public very shortly, and people will have the information necessary to make enlightened decisions. We will always help family small business. We want more fairness in our tax system, and Mr. Speaker, we'd like to remind people that this government created 600,000 jobs, and we have a growth rate that is the best in the G7. We are the envy of the world. They were never able to accomplish this in 10 years. The Honourable Member for Hochelaga. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals promised to fix the problematic elements of the Conservative Anti-Terrorist Bill. And the Privacy Commissioner sounded the alarm in committee yesterday on Bill C-59. The threshold of disclosing information is too low. Will the government agree to make changes to the bill in order to protect Canadians' rights? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yesterday, the Privacy Commissioner said that Canada is moving from the back of the pack and catching up with the rest of the international community. In fact, he said moving to the lead as a result of the legislation with C-59. So the fact of the matter is that this legislation is putting us at the vanguard, that we are ensuring two things equally. One, the protection of Canadians, and two, making sure that their rights are protected.
Honourable Member for Hamilton Mountain.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are claiming it is not possible to repeal Conservative Bill C-51. But my colleague from Esquimalt, Saanich Suk, is proposing just that with his Bill C-303 to fully protect Canadians' rights. Under the 138-page Liberal Bill C-59, CISA still has expansive and invasive powers. The privacy of Canadians is still under threat, and oversight of government agency is insufficient. Will the government divide Bill C-59 into separate bills so they can be properly studied? Canadian rights are at stake.
Hear, hear. Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Bill C-59 was preceded by the most exhaustive public consultation that happened across Canada ever on national security. Secondly, there was an opportunity by the Public Safety and National Security Committee to ensure that there was a review of the security framework, and that led to the legislation that's before us today that is going to see finally the oversight that was talked about for so many years, including when I was the critic in opposition and pushing for it. We've waited for over a decade. It's time to move forward with appropriate oversight.
Honourable Member for Hamilton Mountain.
Mr. Speaker, the finance ministers will be meeting this weekend, and we're worried the federal finance minister might once again impose his own vision. He failed to consult with the provinces before announcing his plan for the taxation of cannabis, and he did the same for health transfers. And now concerns are being raised that the Liberals will change equalization payments without consulting the provinces first. What is wrong with this government? The Liberals must work with the provinces instead of simply imposing changes. When will the government honour its commitment to true partnership with the provinces?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the contrary, we value the work that we do with provinces, and we look forward to the discussions that will happen next week with the finance ministers of all provinces as we continue to collaborate with all provinces and territories to make sure that our economy is successful and thriving. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
La députée d'Hochelaga.
The Honourable Member for Hochelaga. Mr. Speaker, we learned yesterday that the government would be imposing its vision of housing and health care. They're now planning to change the way equalization is calculated. Is that a partnership? The finance ministers will be meeting at the end of the week. Will the government finally start treating provinces and municipalities as partners rather than subordinates? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, we have always treated provinces as partners, and we're looking forward to the discussions between the Minister and his counterparts in the provinces. We want to work in a good way with all provinces.
2,000 small businesses in my riding, and most of them are run by people with families, and many of them live hand to mouth depending on the vagaries of the federal tax system. And the Minister of Finance has said that he's changing the rules on January 1st, but he refuses to provide any details. Just how does the Minister think that giving these people less than 24 days to do their tax planning is fair, especially at Christmas?
Honourable Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's important to highlight that our government has always been behind small businesses. We've lowered the small business tax rate from 10.5 to 9% by 2019. We believe that's important to stimulate growth. And with regards to the question from the member opposite, the details will come very shortly. Our goal here has always been to bring more fairness to our tax system while supporting the family business model in Canada.
Honourable Member for Haldimand Norfolk.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd say that the Liberals are acting like Scrooges, except that Scrooge saved money, and that's a foreign concept for this Liberal government. I mean, they seem to think it's fair to spend $2.2 million paying actors for their talents, but when it comes to small business owners, the Liberals don't think it's fair to tell them how the tax changes are going to affect them. Now, in the spirit of Christmas, will the Minister tell them what to expect so that they can plan for the new year?
Here. The Honourable Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've mentioned time and time again, the details will come very shortly. And what's a foreign concept to the opposition is probably the concept of tax fairness in and of itself. And growing this economy as well has been a foreign concept to them. Well, they've had the lowest growth since the Second World War. They've had high unemployment, and we've reduced the unemployment levels to the lowest they've been in a decade, Mr. Speaker. That's because this government understands the economy and understands what measures needs to be taken to create a prosperous environment in Canada.
La députée de Beauce.
The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, for 5 months now, small business people all over the country are awaiting the tax measures that were promised, where they will see their taxes rise. And here, just after Christmas, in January, we will all be celebrating the new year, but business people will be celebrating less. Will Canadian business people get to know about these changes before the end of the year? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Yes, Mr. Speaker.
La députée de Portneuf.
The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Mr. Speaker, why won't the Liberal government answer our questions? What's their game? Once again, the Finance Minister is attacking small business by not telling them what's in store for them in 23 days. They can't plan for things. They can't know. I mean, he's trying to find out whether he's trying to find out if he's in compliance with the Ethics Commissioner. Business people are worried. It's a minute before midnight. Will the government finally give some respect to Canadian business people and inform them of the new tax measures? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The details on income sprinkling will be made public soon, and all Canadians coast to coast will know about these changes, which will lead to greater tax fairness, which is, I know, foreign to the opposition. We are behind small business owners. We're behind entrepreneurs. We know how important they are. And we know that these people have already had a tax reduction, 11 to 9%. We've created 600,000 jobs, and we are committed.
Inville.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this week I met Keith, who owns 3 restaurants and employed 90 people. I met him while he was working a double shift just to make his payroll. He's working 7 days a week just to survive. This government continues to make it harder for his restaurant to be successful, but it gets worse. He does not even know what changes he will face on January 1st. Is this finance minister so preoccupied with his many ethical messes that he doesn't have the time to do his job?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I think it's important to remind the member and entrepreneurs across the country that we stand behind them. That's why we've decided to lower the small business tax rate to 9% by 2019, and for the employees in those businesses, we've increased the working income tax benefit by 65%, which will represent more money in the pocket, while reducing taxes for the middle class. That's more money in the pocket of Canadians from the middle class. That's what we're trying to achieve, is have a successful middle class, have a successful small business ecosystem, so that we create growth in this country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Sturgeon River, Parkland.
Mr. Speaker, on January 1st, there will be major changes to the way small businesses are taxed. The new small business tax changes will have a significant impact on the people I represent. To make matters worse, the Liberals have yet to release their tax plan. This leads Canadians to wonder if the Finance Minister is too preoccupied with his ethical fiascos to do his job. Why has the Finance Minister failed to tell us the details of his plan?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The details will come very shortly in advance of the January 1st implementation date, and I can tell you that the Finance Minister has been preoccupied for the last 2 years with growing this economy, and he's managed to create the conditions for Canada's economy to grow at 3.7% in the last year. That's top of the G7. He's managed to reach the lowest unemployment we've seen in a decade. That's something I can understand their envy, Mr. Speaker, and why they want to keep playing politics. On this side, we're working for Canadians and for Canada's economy.
Honourable member for Saskatoon West.
Mr. Speaker, in Saskatchewan last weekend, the advance polls for the by-election in Battleford Lloydminster were taking place. Yet there were no advance polls in any Indigenous community. So Indigenous people who wanted to vote needed to travel in the middle of winter up to 45 minutes to get to an advance poll. This is unacceptable. How can we encourage better election participation from Indigenous people if we don't have advance polls anywhere near Indigenous communities? And how is this part of a nation-to-nation relationship?
Honourable Parliament Secretary for Democratic Institutions.
Mr. Speaker, there is no relationship more important to this government than the relationship with our Indigenous peoples. The ability to vote is fundamental to all Canadians and all Canadian citizens, including Indigenous peoples. We'll look into the matter and look forward to working with all parliamentarians to address it. Thank you very much.
Deputy de Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagot.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagot. Mr. Speaker, Parliament is winding down, and I have a question about i.e. sick leave benefits. More than a third of people who contribute will need more than 15 weeks provided for by this program. The Prime Minister had promised to review the system. Halfway through their mandate, the situation has still not moved, has not changed. People can't wait anymore. When, and I repeat, when, will this government finally review the sick leave benefit plan of unemployment insurance? Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to be a member of a government that understands just how important the IE system is, not only for helping people get back to work and also for people in difficult situations. We have been working hard to make the system more flexible, more generous, and we're going to continue to do so, Mr. Speaker. We'll be working hard with our partners to make things better.
Confederation.
Mr. Speaker, there are thousands of Canadians suffering daily from Lyme disease. The minister goes on about the three-pillar plan. She talks about the surveillance, the education, and best practices, but nothing is being done to those suffering today. Her response has been weak and disappointing. This Liberal government's plan is known to be incomplete and grossly underfunded. They've budgeted a mere $4 million for research. Why are the Liberals spending more on a temporary rink outside than it spends for Lyme disease sufferers?
Great question. Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, our government recognizes the impact of Lyme disease on families and on Canadians. We've tabled the federal framework on Lyme disease in Canada, which clearly lays out the federal government's role in addressing Lyme disease in Canada. Our government also invested $4 million to establish the Lyme Disease Research Network. This network will work to generate new evidence and data about Lyme disease and ultimately will improve diagnosis and treatment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of National Revenue claims the disability tax credit rules haven't changed for Canadians with type 1 diabetes, but that's not true. An internal CRA memo from May 2nd directs staff to reject all those claims unless there are exceptional circumstances. In Lakeland, Alice, a small business owner, and her son, both type 1 diabetics, have received that credit for many years. This spring, the CRA rejected her claim. Wow. Will the minister stop this cold-hearted attack on vulnerable Canadians and reverse this cruel decision?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary to the Minister of National Revenue.
Mr. Speaker, as a registered nurse, I have personally seen the impact that diabetes can have on the lives of individuals and their families. I'm happy to say that the member of Diabetes Canada is part of the Disability Advisory Committee announced today. This committee will improve the agency's administration of benefits and credits for Canadians with disabilities. The agency will review all applications for disability tax credit under the life-sustaining therapy, which were processed with the revised clarification letter. Mr. Speaker, our position has been absolutely clear. Everyone who is eligible for this credit must have access to it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Beauport, Côte-de-Beaupré, Île-d'Orléans, Charlevoix. This is a recorded message. This is what they use to answer questions. They've been saying for weeks that nothing has changed with respect to the eligibility criteria for people who have type 1 diabetes, but there is a memo of May last which indicates the opposite. I think that misleading Canadians is unacceptable. When will the minister finally do the right thing and change their decision? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Difficulties that face Canadians living with disabilities and their families as a registered nurse. I want to assure all Canadians who benefit from the DTC that the eligibility criteria for this credit has not changed. We're always open to hearing the concerns of Canadians. That is why we have re-established the Disability Advisory Committee, which was gutted, Mr. Speaker, by the previous government. Our priority has always been clear. It's to continue to focus on the most vulnerable in our country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Mr. Speaker, I continue to hear from constituents with type 1 diabetes who are suddenly being denied the disability tax credit. They're worried about a Liberal policy change they weren't told about and don't understand. However, the Revenue Minister continues to say that nothing has changed. It is obvious who is telling the truth, as a May 2nd memo proves that the eligibility criteria changed. Clearly, the minister is intentionally misleading Canadians. When will she admit she made a decision to raise taxes on type 1 diabetics?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Revenue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me assure my colleague and all Canadians that we're committed to ensuring that Canadians receive the benefits to which they're entitled to. We have put in place measures to make the disability tax credit more accessible than ever before, Mr. Speaker. We've simplified the DTC forms. We've added nurse practitioners to certify their patients' applications. And today, Mr. Speaker, we also announced the membership of the Disability Advisory Committee, which will improve the accessibility of this credit for the most vulnerable in our country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I just note the Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore in her question commented and used the phrase deliberately misleading. Members will be reminded that that is a phrase that members should avoid. Notes of misleading and so on have been considered parliamentary, but when deliberate is put into the equation, that does cross a line and becomes non-parliamentary. So I just urge caution in respect to that kind of phraseology. The Honourable Member for Essex.
For many years, people in Windsor and Essex have endured a persistent low-frequency vibration coming from the U.S. known as the hum. Over the last few weeks, people have reported the hum to be louder, shaking homes, affecting sleep, creating earaches and headaches. The Liberals promised to work on this issue, but despite several attempts for information, the Minister of Foreign Affairs has yet to answer. The hum continues to negatively affect the health of my constituents in Essex and people in Windsor. They deserve answers. What action are the Liberals taking to address this issue, and why do they think it's okay for people to keep waiting?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
The Government of Canada is well aware of the seriousness of the complaints from residents in the City of Windsor to which I was a couple of weeks ago with my distinguished colleague, and of course the resultant pain caused by the noise. We understand their concern. Our officials have consistently raised the issue with their American counterparts. We will continue to engage and work to find a solution. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the U.S. International Trade Commission once again targeted the Canadian forest industry, a decision that the BC Lumber Trade Council has called completely without merit. The U.S. lumber industry is enjoying record profits, and Canadian imports are at a lower level today than they were when deemed non-injurious by the ITC in the last round of litigation. What is the government doing today to support Canadian producers in their appeal of this latest American decision? And when can we expect to see a long-term resolution to this ongoing battle?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary and Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Speaker, as we've said throughout this dispute, punitive U.S. countervailing and anti-dumping duties on Canadian softwood lumber are disturbing, troubling, and unjust. In recent weeks, we've begun legal challenges against U.S. duties on Canadian softwood under both NAFTA and the World Trade Organization rules. Our lawyers are hard at work. Our forest industry has succeeded in every previous dispute, and we will continue to fiercely defend our softwood lumber industry and its fantastic workers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member, L'Honourable Deputy to Glengarry.
The Honourable Member for Glengarry Prescott Russell. Mr. Speaker, our government set an ambitious target of increasing our agricultural exports to $75 billion by 2025. The implementation of CETA will help drive that goal and provide up to an additional $1.5 billion in exports per year. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture inform this House on what we're doing to ensure open doors for our farmers in Europe, help them take advantage of these opportunities, and promote our world-class farmers, ranchers, and growers on the international stage? The Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture. I would like to thank my colleague for Glengarry Prescott Russell and thank him for his excellent work on the Agriculture Committee. The Minister led a trade mission in Europe where he attended the biggest food fair in the world. He met official representatives and helped to open doors to our beef and pork producers. The Canadian industry has developed trade relationships that will lead to billions of dollars of sales. We've committed to putting more money in the pockets of our farmers and making sure that they can benefit from the best opportunities they can throughout the world.
Durham.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister wrapped up his second visit to Asia in 2 months, and once again he comes home having embarrassed Canada on the trade file. He says around the world that he'll only sign trade deals with his so-called progressive agenda, but then quietly in the U.S. they tell our NAFTA partners that all of those progressive priorities will be non-binding, Mr. Speaker. So today I'm going to ask the Parliamentary Secretary to put aside the sheet the PMO provided him and confirm to us today that when he and others are in the U.S., they're telling NAFTA stakeholders that the progressive agenda will all be non-binding.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, no.
The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. I would like to thank the member for his effort, but from the beginning of renegotiating NAFTA, the Conservative Party has just been asking the minister to take the priorities of our federation seriously. Every time we're attacked, we want to talk about trade. I would ask the minister to answer, now that it is clear that there will not be an agreement before 2018, can we be reassured that the minister will do everything to save NAFTA? Because that's the situation we're in now. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our position is clear. We are going to defend and maintain what we've acquired and make sure that they are in our interest. We negotiate in good faith, and we expect our partners to do the same. However, we will not accept any proposals that would undermine our jobs and our economy. We will all defend Canadian values and interests. We want a good agreement, not just any agreement.
Caribou, Prince George.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since day one, we've been challenging this government to make securing a new softwood agreement their #1 trade priority. Well, no surprise to the rest of us, yesterday's U.S. ruling seems to have caught this Liberal government off guard. Mr. Speaker, softwood lumber is now being held ransom by U.S. or an increasing protectionist administration. Hardworking forestry families and their livelihoods are being held ransom. With only weeks to go before Christmas, what is this minister planning to do and prepared to do for Canadian families?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, our government stands firmly behind the Canadian forest industry, which sustains hundreds of thousands of good jobs across the country. Through our Softwood Lumber Action Plan, we are investing $867 million to support workers and communities affected by these unjustified duties, to diversify markets and create access to international markets, and provide financial services on commercial terms. We will vigorously defend Canada's lumber industry, including through litigation as we're doing, and we are not looking for any deal for Canada, Mr. Speaker. We're looking for a good deal. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Whether it be in Saint-André, New Brunswick, or Canadian grain farmers that I met in Calgary, everybody is wondering who's defending agriculture in this government. They've been treated like tax cheats. Family transfers have been put at risk. Tools like deferred payments were targeted for removal, and the government refused to divide C-59 for the long-haul train transportation. The list is long. The Minister of Agriculture is excluded from all free trade negotiations. Agriculture is the basis of our economy. So why are the Liberals abandoning farmers? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, our government strongly supports supply management. We are the party that fighted to implement it, and we will continue to defend it. We will also defend the interests of all Canadian farming during negotiations. Thank you.
Gina Lubin.
Mr. Speaker, a year ago, the Government Operations Committee tabled an all-party report calling on Canada Post to restore door-to-door delivery. And last week, the Minister of Public Services and Procurement promised that she would finally respond to the report before the House rises. But her Director of Communications backtracked yesterday, saying the minister would respond in due time. Will the minister clarify to Canadians whether she will respond before the House adjourns, or will she break yet another promise?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Services.
Monsieur le Président, merci.
Mr. Speaker, thank you to my honourable colleague for his question.
Canadian institution, especially this time of year, our government delivered on its promise to suspend the Harper Plan to dismantle home delivery. This current government is currently studying, of course, the report of my honourable friends committee, as well as the task force, and of course we will be reporting as indicated by the end of the year.
The Honourable Member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. Mr. Speaker, 70% of the children in the Guy Favreau Early Childhood Care Complex are the children of federal public servants, but the government now wants it to pay rent at market price. Quebec is doing its part to help, but the federal government, for its part, is not keeping its promise and is only offering $50,000 a year, which is half of what this daycare needs. Will the government review its priorities and finally grant a decent subsidy to maintain an essential service for children and their families? The Honourable Minister of Families, Children and Social Development. We can see just how early childhood services are the key to our economy and our society. Children are a precious resource. Over the last few years, we've made historic investments. We've established partnerships with provinces and territories to make sure that our communities, especially families and children, can benefit from support from the Canadian government, not only now, but in the long term. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haut-Saint-Charles. In June 2016, the UN passed a resolution to bring ISIS combatants before the courts for the crime of genocide. Canada welcomed 25,000 Syrian refugees to protect them from these fanatical killers. We've been clear that the Islamic State is the enemy of Canadians and that it will be impossible to interact with these murderers. It is not a matter of money, but ideology. Will the minister take a firm stance and incarcerate ISIS combatants that return to Canada? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Of course, we and all members of this House condemn the actions of ISIS and will pursue criminal charges against any individual who is found to commit terrorist acts. I would say that those individuals have returned. We have 2 active cases where we're seeking to go after individuals with evidence. I would note that in the 10 years under the Conservatives, the number of cases pursued, 0. So the reality is the record shows something different.
The honourable member for Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Public Safety has said that returning ISIS terrorists are unlikely to ever be de-radicalized, and yet millions are being spent on these programs. How can anyone think that this is a good plan? This government knows that hundreds of ISIS terrorists are returning after committing their atrocities like nothing ever happened. Canadians know this is completely unacceptable. Mr. Speaker, will the minister commit to protect Canadians by prosecuting these terrorists?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, again, let me be clear. Yes, of course, we will go after any individual who has committed terror. But I would hope that the member opposite would join me in saying that there are acts of terror that have not been committed, that there are people beginning to walk a dark path, that we do not want to go down that path, and that prevention, which that government unfortunately did not invest in, dealing with de-radicalization is a huge priority to keep our country safe. That's why we're making it a major priority, along with going after those that have already done us harm.
The honourable member for Edmonton Greensbach.
Mr. Speaker, they burn people alive in cages. They kill gays by throwing them off buildings. They kidnap and rape children. Now these terrorists are returning to Canada after fighting against us overseas. But instead of arresting them, the Liberals want to reintegrate them into our society. And to do that, and I'm not making this up, Liberals plan to employ methods such as poetry and podcasts. When will Liberals take the public safety of Canadians seriously?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, of course, this government is doing exactly what the Conservative government didn't do. We're investing in the services that keep this country safe. Need I remind the member opposite of the cuts that the Harper government implemented to the very services that keep this country safe? $530 million from the RCMP, $390 million from the Canadian Border Services Agency. They cut $69 million from CSIS, $42 million from the Communication Security Establishment, and $171 million from the Canadian Air Transport Facility. Mr. Speaker, reinvest while they cut.
The honourable member for King Vaughan.
Mr. Speaker, our government was elected on a promise to strengthen science in Canada after suffering neglect under the previous Conservative government. As part of this renewed commitment, the Minister of Science commissioned a report on the state of fundamental science in Canada. The report highlighted the need for increased equity and diversity and more opportunities for young researchers in our research ecosystem. Can the Minister of Science speak to the importance of diversity and how we are creating new opportunities for young researchers across the country?
Honourable Minister of Science.
I want to thank the member for King Vaughan for her excellent work. Our government understands that diversity and research excellence go hand in hand. By increasing diversity, we bring different experiences, ideas, perspectives to advance Canadian science, grow the economy, and improve the lives of Canadians. That's why I'm acting on the recommendations of the Fundamental Science Review and the evaluation of the Canada Research Chairs program by limiting Tier 1 renewals. This change will create new opportunities for our researchers.
The honourable member for Niagara West.
Mr. Speaker, the Bring Wallene Home campaign has captured the hearts and attention of people from all across Canada. Still today, the Earl family live in danger despite numerous empty promises to help from the Prime Minister. Now they're being told that the only way that the Prime Minister will help them is if they obtain an adoption order from Haiti, which will require them leaving Wallene in a state-run orphanage for up to 3 years. The Minister of Immigration has everything he needs to grant a temporary resident permit and bring Wallene to safety. Mr. Speaker, as we approach Christmas, I'm asking the Prime Minister to give this family some hope and commit to helping bring Wallene home.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Heritage.
Mr. Speaker, our government understands that immigration cases can have a profound impact on all individuals' lives. When we're dealing with this specific case, an inter-country adoption is often a long and complex process, and we understand the challenges that are faced by families. The Minister is aware of this case. His office has been in touch with the family in order to assist them with this legal process. We are bound as a country by international and domestic laws on adoption, and as such, there are strict rules in place and criteria that must be met before a child can be legally removed from one country to another. Thank you.
For Sydney Victoria.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Atlantic Canada is thriving on international trade. Our economy depends more than ever on opening new markets. Last September, our producers and fishers got to explore a whole new opportunity in Europe with the CETA agreement. Last month, I had a chance to talk with the Victoria Fishers Co-op from Northern Cape Breton, who are telling me that business is booming. Can the Parliamentary Secretary, Minister of International Trade, share with this House how CETA helped shape the future for Atlantic provinces?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the honourable member from Sydney, Victoria, for all his hard work and leadership on the International Trade Committee. When CETA came into force last September, an incredible opportunity opened up for Atlantic provinces to develop new markets and grow their businesses. Atlantic Canadians now have tariff-free access to the lucrative European market for their high-quality, world-renowned seafood products. 500 million customers are looking forward to experience a taste of Atlantic Canada.
The honourable member for Edmonton Riverbend. There he is.
Mr. Speaker, this government has set a new record for appointment backlogs. Stuck in the staggering pile of 594 vacant or expired appointments are the 12 of the 15 seats on the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council's board. Similarly, 80% of the seats on the NSERC board are also vacant. Can the Minister please tell us when these vacancies will be filled? 80%.
The Honourable Minister of Science.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and let me welcome my colleague to his new role. Our government has put in place a new appointment process which supports open, transparent, and merit-based selection processes. It was this process that was used to appoint Canada's new Chief Science Advisor, about which our colleague from Beauce said, quote, "I read your biography, and I believe, like all my colleagues do, that you're an excellent choice. The member opposite can expect the same rigorous process can be followed to ensure all board appointments are qualified and reflect Canada."
La députée de Joliette.
The honourable member for Joliette. Mr. Speaker, Monday and Tuesday, the Ministers of Finance met to negotiate sharing the cannabis tax. It's well known that Quebec and the municipalities have to take on 100% of the costs. Therefore, they should have 100% of that tax revenue. But here's the twist. In C-63, the government here in Ottawa quietly decided to collect all of the tax and then transfer some of it, depending on its goodwill. Does the government agree that tax sharing should reflect cost sharing, which means 100% to Quebec and 0 to Ottawa? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice.
Our government released a discussion document after discussions with the First Ministers of all of the provinces and territories, as well as the Finance Ministers of those jurisdictions. That discussion document has garnered input from municipalities, from stakeholders, and from industry from across the country. That feedback will inform discussions that are scheduled to take place this weekend between the finance ministers of all the provinces and territories to resolve this important issue. And I want to assure this member that the interests of all who have costs in making the system work are under consideration in those discussions.
The honourable member for Repentigny. Do you know who knows culture, Mr. Speaker? Artists, artisans, producers from Quebec and the Quebecers that consume it, and they all refuse letting the Minister of Heritage support an unfair privilege for web-based giants with her Netflix privilege agreement. Unions, government, management, everyone is tired of hearing the Minister of Heritage bring back to Quebec the federal government's empty rhetoric instead of defending our culture in Ottawa. Today, before the Montreal Chamber of Commerce, instead of rambling in newspeak, will the Minister stop being condescending and finally listen to those who really know culture? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Canadian Heritage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have always been very clear That said, what we presented was a cultural policy to invest in culture. Quebecers and Canadians are worried about the impact on our culture, and that is why we're investing massively in arts and cultures, $2.3 billion, the highest investment in the G7 compared to the previous government. Unlike the previous government, we understand the value of culture to our economy, hundreds of thousands of jobs and hundreds of millions of dollars for our economy. The member for Repentigny. Nice. I've got a sad story for you. 281 people lost their jobs yesterday at Davie Shipyard. Merry Christmas to the region of Quebec from the federal government. Nearly 400 families are on unemployment because the government refuses to put the best shipyard in North America to work. We need contracts, and not in 2 weeks. We need them now, immediately. This week, we found out that 5 ministers have been working behind the scenes to move the file forward. But who's slowing it down? Is it senior officials? Is it the Minister of Finance? Is it the Treasury Board? Who is slowing it down? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Services. Mr. Speaker, evidently we are very concerned about this, and we do not delight in job losses in Quebec or anywhere else. Evidently, this government is trying to move opportunities forward, namely to Davie Shipyard, whether it be in the short, medium, and long term. Within the context of our shipbuilding strategy, we have every confidence that opportunities will present themselves to Davie Shipyard. We very much want to reassure people in Quebec that the government is looking into this and we are working on this file.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Crown, Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs. What we heard report on the Nutrition North program was released 8 months ago. Since that time, I've asked the Minister on numerous occasions when Nunavut can expect the much-needed culturally relevant changes to the program. When I asked the same question on May 5th, Mr. Speaker, the response was that the launch of the new program would be very soon. Mr. Speaker, my constituents are growing impatient. My question again is, when can Nunavut expect these much-needed changes? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister for Crown Indigenous Relations.
Nakamik to the member. It is completely unacceptable that many Northerners are still struggling to feed their families. As you know, our government already expanded Nutrition North to support 37 additional communities. However, we know that much more needs to be done. We are considering all the feedback received during the recent engagement and are collaborating with Northern and Indigenous organizations to overhaul the program to be more reflective of Northern's needs and to work together on accessibility to country food. Together, we can ensure Northern families have access to affordable, healthy food.
I would like to I'd like to draw to the attention of honourable members the presence in the gallery of Mr. Tora Vomrock, State Secretary for the Minister of Finance for the Kingdom of Norway.
And I believe there's a point of order from the Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. During question period, taxing businesses came up often, and I would like to ask the unanimous consent of the House to table the budget tabled by the Finance Minister on the 22nd of March 2016, because he said
income tax rate be deferred, unquote.
Mr. Speaker, may I table this budget here in this House? The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent is asking for unanimous consent. Does he have unanimous consent? Unanimous consent is not granted.
The Honourable Member for Durham on a point of order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I have a point of order arising out of question period. It relates to a response given by the Parliamentary Secretary to Public Safety. And I was quite startled by the claim he suggested that in the 10 years of the Conservative government, there were 0 cases pursued for acts of terrorism, Mr. Speaker. That was his quote to this House. What is startling about that, Mr. Speaker, as a Toronto area member, he seems to forget the Toronto 18 case, Mr. Speaker, that was not just pursued but prosecuted.
I accept the honourable member as attempting to raise a point of order. The nature of his intervention really seems to be a point of debate as to the facts that were presented in the House this afternoon. He may wish to take that up under other parts of the rubric that permit him to do so here in the House of Commons. And we'll go to tabling of documents, dépôt de documents. Introduction of government bills. Déclaration.
Statements by ministers.
Rapport de
Reports from interparliamentary delegations.
Parliamentary delegations. Presenting reports from committees.
The honourable member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is my honour to table in both official languages the 7th report of the Standing Committee on Official Languages, entitled Certificate of Nomination of Raymond Théberge to the position of Commissioner of Official Languages.
Presenting reports from committees, the honourable member for Malpeque.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have the honour to present in both official languages the 21st report of the Standing Committee on Finance entitled Driving Inclusive Growth, Spurring Productivity and Competitiveness in Canada. Mr. Speaker, I want to especially thank committee members of all parties for their long hours and diligent work, and the public for their input with over 400 submissions and over 300 witnesses. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the clerk of the committee, Susie Cadeau, and analyst Brett Capstick, analyst Andrew Barton, and research assistants Sean Wei-Poo and Stephanie Stark. I'm hopeful, Mr. Speaker, that the summation in this report, which includes some 92 recommendations, will assist the government in moving forward in assisting the business community and persons in this country on being more competitive and productive so that we are a more prosperous society for Canadians well into the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And I understand there is a dissenting report, and we'll hear that from the honourable member for Carleton.
You are correct, Mr. Chair. There is a dissenting report. Before I introduce its contents, let me just say that I thank the chairman of the Finance Committee for presiding over a very well-executed study, even though the conversations were interesting and much information was produced. The final report by the majority was, in our view, flawed. And as a result, we introduce a dissenting report. In it, we call on the government to cancel any and all tax increases, including, but not limited to those imposed on diabetics, autistic people, and others to whom the government has suddenly denied the disability tax credit. And I am pleased to report to the House that just today, even before we had the opportunity to formally table this dissenting report, it appears the government is relenting under pressure by the official opposition and reinstating the disability tax credit for type 1 diabetics. And I'm very pleased to learn that they are backing down from this cold-hearted tax increase that they had attempted to put into place back in May of this year. We will be watching very carefully to make sure that this is not yet another head fake by the government to deceive people who are suffering and are vulnerable. And we will continue to hold them to account if they try to target with other vulnerable people with tax increases. In addition to that recommendation, Mr. Speaker, our dissenting report makes the broad view that the government should emphasize free markets and free enterprise as the greatest hope to eliminate poverty and expand opportunity for everyone. That contrasts with the big government central planning that the main report proposes and the overall direction of this government, which is to impose higher costs, heavier regulations, and more severe burdens on the people who pay the bills in this country. Thank you.
Presenting reports from committees. First reading of Senate public bills. Première lecture de projet de loi intérêt public émanant du Sénat. Motions. Motion. Presenting petitions. Présentation de pétition. The Honourable Member for Courtenay Alberni.
Honored and proud to rise today to table a petition on behalf of constituents in my riding in their call for the establishment of a national cycling strategy. Mr. Speaker, with rising and soaring healthcare costs, infrastructure costs, and the need to tackle greenhouse gases, these constituents and petitioners have tabled this petition calling on the government to establish a strategy with clear targets so that we can join countries like the Netherlands, Norway, France, Germany, all which have increased cycling and helped create the necessary safe infrastructure so that they can become cycling nations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting petitions. The Honourable Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to present a petition respecting the troubling political situation in Cambodia, where there have been gross human rights violations and an undermining of democracy by Hun Sen's regime. The petitioners note that Hun Sen's regime has been in violation of the Paris agreements by undermining democracy and repeatedly violating human rights. Whereas Canada is a signatory to the Paris Agreement, the petitioners call upon Parliament to exert political pressure on the Cambodian government to honour the Paris Agreement and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, appeal to the signatory governments of the Paris Agreement to address the current crisis in Cambodia and the failure of the Cambodian government under Prime Minister Hun Sen to respect human rights and democracy, and to call for international support to monitor election rights, support the National Election Commission, and support only a free and fair process during the upcoming general elections in 2018.
Presenting petitions. The Honourable Member for Winnipeg North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Public and private drug plans often leave thousands of Manitobans, in fact, many more Canadians, with little or no coverage when it comes to prescribed medications. This petition is signed by many constituents in Winnipeg North and others are asking for the Government of Canada to work with the premiers and look at ways in which we could possibly change the Canada Health Act, look at ways in which we can have a universal drug plan for all Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting petitions. The Honourable Member for Calgary Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I actually have 3 petitions to table today, so you'll just give me some time here so I can present them. The first one is from 26 petitioners. It's a petition regarding Bill C-51 and religious freedoms. The petitioners are drawing attention of the House to the potential removal of Section 176 of the Criminal Code, which is the only section there, they say, that protects faith leaders from malicious interference with funerals, rituals, or other assemblies of any faith. It also draws attention of the House to Bill C-305, which was passed earlier in the year, and drawing some of the allusions to it. They're asking for 2 things. They're asking the government to abandon any attempt to repeal Section 176 of the Criminal Code and to stand up for the rights of all Canadians to practice their religion without fear of recrimination, violence, or discrimination. My second petition is on the proposed small business tax changes. It is signed by 65 constituents of mine. They draw the attention of the House to Canadians have not been given adequate time to be consulted and to provide feedback. Family businesses will suffer the most because it's essential to their retirement plans and rewards risks inherent in starting a small business, and that small businesses, doctors and family farms and others will also be unfairly penalized. They're asking for one thing from the Government of Canada. They're asking them to abandon the unfair tax proposals and defend Canadian businesses as the main driver of the economy. Finally, my third petition is on the enforced disappearances of political and human rights activists in the Sindh province in Pakistan. I want to thank 2 of my constituents, especially Asif Panwar and Max Menon. It has 33 signatures on it. They're drawing the attention of the House to the fact that 160 people, activists, have gone missing since February 2017 without any information on their whereabouts. Every person missing so far is either a political worker, a human rights activist, or a journalist, writer who has raised their voice in the cause of the human rights of Sindhi people. They say that there are over 1,200 cases of missing persons in Sindh have been reported since 2010, and most of the victims have turned up dead or with signs of having been tortured and murdered. So they're asking two things of the Canadian government. They urge the Pakistani government to stop the human rights violations against the Sindhi people committed by Pakistani security agencies. And finally, they're asking for aid to Pakistan should be tied to the human rights record because Canadian aid dollars should not be used to support these agencies who are kidnapping, torturing, and murdering their own citizens. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting petitions. Présentation de pétitions. Questions on the order paper. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The following questions will be answered today. Question 1260, question 1262, question 1263, question 1264, question 1265, and question 1266. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, if the government's response to question 1261 could be made an order for return, this return would be tabled immediately.
Is it the pleasure of the House that the aforementioned questions be made orders for return and that they be tabled immediately? Is that agreed? Agreed and so ordered. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, then finally, Mr. Speaker, I would ask that all remaining questions be allowed to stand at this time, please.
Is that also agreed? Agreed? Agreed and so ordered. Orders of the day. Order du jour.
Government orders, Government Bills Commons, resuming debate at second reading of Bill C-66, Expungement of Historically Unjust Convictions Act.
When the House last took up the question, there were 8 minutes remaining in the time for questions and comments to the Honourable Member for Saskatoon West. So we'll go to that now. Questions and comments. L'Honourable Député d'Hochelaga.
The Honourable Member for Hochelaga. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I completely agree with my colleague that the apology and Bill C-66 are steps in the right direction. And I also agree that there is still a lot to be done. At the end of her speech, she started talking about other suggestions that she might have for the government in order to make sure that LGBTQ2 people don't see their rights harmed in the future. So I'd like her to talk about what the government might do in that direction.
Last.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my honourable colleague for that comment and that question about I had talked about in my speech some of the additional pieces that I'd like to see the government move on to continue this important first step today that we're taking, and that is with Bill C-66. But there are other things that need to happen quickly after the apology so that Canadians, and especially LGBTQ2 Canadians, know that the government is serious and following through. And those were such as ending the ban on men who have sex with men being able to donate blood. There is no scientific evidence for that ban, and it needs to be removed right now. People count on people donating blood, and it's just simply unacceptable. The government also has introduced, and it has stalled, we haven't seen what's happened with the changes to the criminal code around the age of consent. We would like to see that piece come forward very quickly. So those are two that I think the government could move on very quickly to continue the momentum to show Canadians that the apology was just a first step towards making Canada more just for LGBTQ Canadians and, in fact, all Canadians, I believe, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for St. Catharines.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for her speech. It's clear also that she is a passionate advocate for the LGBTQ2 community in her riding and beyond. I want to thank her for that, and many and all of her colleagues in the NDP for the passionate work that they do. We were all fortunate, or I'll speak for myself, Mr. Speaker, I was fortunate to be here for the Prime Minister's apology, and I had a different view than a lot of Canadians who watched at home, and the camera was on the Prime Minister, but I got to look up at the gallery and see the faces of the individuals who have suffered, oftentimes for decades, because of they were fought by their own government because of who they loved. And to see the sign of relief that the government acknowledged the wrongs was significant. But the honourable member mentioned in her speech that if it was just an apology, that is only words, but that there is action that was taken. I was wondering if she could take a moment and expand on that and the importance to the LGBTQ2 community in her riding. I know members from Pride Niagara were present in Ottawa for the speech, and the apology was significant, but the actions were significant as well. So I was wondering if she could comment on that. Thank you.
The honourable member for Saskatoon West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for his comments. And I think what I tried to do in my speech through the timeline is to really point out the number of times that governments and communities had come close to getting changes in legislation, only to have another jurisdiction put the community back, deny human rights, and of course that long timeline of over 50 years of the resources and the people's lives to simply get the recognition of people's human rights that are there in the Charter actually extended to all Canadians, and of course I'm talking about including LGBTQ2 Canadians. So the apology was heard by many different people. For some people, they will have remembered the incidents and the persecution could have happened to them. It could have happened to a family member. I think our parliamentary leader sort of spoke to some of the individuals that were impacted. So everyone had an opportunity to hear the words by the government, to apologize. That's important. But it's so critical, and I think that was the gist of my comments, that legislation needs to change, that we need to get going very quickly so that Canadians don't see ourselves going back into making a promise and LGBTQ Canadians needing to wait years to see that realized through legislation. So I'm very proud to be able to support and help the government and Parliament move forward as quickly as possible on Bill C-66 so we can get to some of the other matters I also mentioned in my speech that are also just as important. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? La députée de Laurier-Sainte-Marie.
The honourable member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I would also like to thank my colleague for all her work on this file. It's something that I've been following very carefully, and I have noted her commitment and the commitment of both our critics with respect to LGBTQ2 issues. And I'm extremely proud to be part of a team where we are supporting this community as much as possible. I'd also like to thank all the people and all organizations who have been struggling to obtain apologies and reparations. And in my own riding of Laurier-Sainte-Marie, there are such people. I say apologies and reparations because this is something we have fought for, to make sure that the apologies weren't simply hollow words, but that there were concrete measures taken. And I am proud to see that the government has rallied to our point of view. But there does remain a problem. It's not clear in the bill because they say that they will expunge criminal records. But does my colleague, has she thought of anything that might deal with this absence, this lack in the bill?
Saskatoon West.
I want to thank my honourable colleague, Mr. Speaker, for her comments and, of course, taking the opportunity, which I think we all have so far in this debate, to really call to the public's attention, those people who are watching the debate today, all the community organizations and the individuals that have really allowed us as parliamentarians to continue to bring forward the fight and, of course, change the law so that discrimination ends. I earlier had asked several questions of the parliamentary secretary. I think what we've said is we think there are some things within the bill that need to be changed, and we want the government open, and one was to make sure that there is no cost involved to the victims of the government's discrimination when it comes to moving forward. And we also had a bit of a conversation here with the parliamentary secretary that I think we need to explore a bit more, and that is around the whole issue of pardons. So there's still some work to do, but it does not need to delay. We can move forward today, Mr. Speaker, and pass this legislation and follow the apology with action. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate. Reprise de débat.
Resuming debate.
La Chambre est-elle prête à se prononcer?
Is the House ready for the question?
La question est la suivante.
Question is as followed. Mr. Goodale, seconded by Mr. Duclos, moves that Bill C-66, an act to establish a procedure for expunging certain historically unjust convictions and to make related amendments to other acts, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security.
Adopt the motion. Yes? Yes? Carried.
Second reading of this bill. Deuxième lecture de ce projet de loi.
Accordingly, this bill stands referred to the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. And I see the honourable member for St. Catharines rising on a point, perhaps.
Mr. Speaker, I believe if you seek it, you will find unanimous consent that the clock be seen to 1:30.
Is it the pleasure of the House to see the clock at 1:30 p.m.? Agreed? Agreed and so ordered. The House will now proceed to the consideration of private members' business as listed on today's order paper. Orders of the day.
Private members' business, second reading of Bill C-375 in the name of Mr. Johari, an act to amend the Criminal Code, pre-sentence report.
Mr. Johari, seconded by Ms. Khalid, moves that Bill C-375, an act to amend the Criminal Code, pre-sentence report, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights. Debate, the honourable member for Richmond Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's an honor for me to rise today to address this House for a second time to talk about my private member's bill, Bill C-375, an act to amend the Criminal Code with respect to pre-sentencing reports. I would like to thank my honourable colleague and a friend, the member from Mississauga Erin Mills, for seconding this bill today. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to reflect at the outset of my statements on the great honour and the privilege I possess as a representative of my constituents in Richmond Hill. This is an honour that no member in this House take lightly, and I'd like to my colleagues, I am aware of the great responsibility that comes with representing one's constituents in this House. I came to Ottawa, Mr. Speaker, having made the commitment to my constituents in Richmond Hill that I would focus all my energies on advancing the progressive ideals that I was elected to uphold and fight for, namely the advancement of equality for all Canadians, in particular with those who feel voiceless and marginalized. When it comes to the subject of mental health, we are all aware of the great sensitivity involved with addressing the challenges of this often marginalized group. It is perhaps this very reason that we must do everything we can to ensure that no stone is left unturned in safeguarding the rights and dignity of those suffering from mental illness. This is a goal I've committed myself to working towards actively and with great care. Through my work as founder and co-chair of the All-Party Mental Health Caucus, I, along with other participating members, heard from numerous stakeholders and experts involved in the field of mental health. I know I can speak for all members who participated when I convey how eye-opening the testimony we heard was. What we heard pointed a picture of current mental health landscape that is rife with gaps and areas of improvement. In particular, issues related to mental health and criminal justice system came to the forefront as needing special attention. To obtain a better understanding of the current issues surrounding the treatment of individuals with mental illness, caucus members visited Kitchener, Ontario, where we received a tour of Grand Valley Institute for Women operated by Correctional Services Canada and heard from Ms. Sherry Payne, herself a formerly incarcerated woman, who informed us of the various challenges faced by the correctional system when it comes to mental illness. Our experience in working with Mental Health Caucus led to our resolve that many operational and legislative changes are still needed to improve the delivery of the service to mental health sufferers, in particular those in our criminal and correctional systems. Section 2 of the Criminal Code defines mental disorder as a disease of mind. Unlike disease of the body, the symptoms that mental illness carries are very often hidden and difficult to diagnose. In too many instances, while mental illness is also misdiagnosed or ignored entirely. In Canada, 10% of the population reports symptoms consistent with mental illness. This burden, sadly, is often greater on our youth, fully 25% of whom will experience a mental health issue as they navigate to adulthood. In our federal penitentiaries, this proportion is even higher. Over 20% of federal offenders are identified as presenting mental health problems, often with more than one disorder. Furthermore, rates of mental illness among federal offenders have almost doubled in the last 20 years. Globally, the World Health Organization reports that by the year 2020, mental and behavioral disorder will account for roughly 15% of the global burden of the disease, which it projects further is likely to increase in proportion in subsequent decades. Even with respect to our attitude to mental illness, there is still work to be done. While half of Canadians reported in 2017 that they are more comfortable talking about mental health than the last 5 years before that, it is also reported that this has not led to an adequate and proportionate growth in community resources for those suffering from mental illness. For individuals suffering from mental illness, then, theirs is often a daily struggle to integrate into families, peer groups, and society as a whole. These same families and peer groups bear an untold burden, both emotional and economical, that must be addressed. It is estimated that the total cost of mental health problems to the Canadian economy exceed $50 billion annually in healthcare expenses and lost productivity. This represents nearly $1,400 for every Canadian. Mr. Speaker, over the next 30 years, this cost will add up to more than $2.5 trillion for the Canadian economy. We all must therefore recognize mental illness as an issue that affects not only the present circumstances of Canadian families, but their future as well. And I'm happy to be able to say that our government announced in Budget 2017 that it will invest $5 billion over 10 years to improve mental health services, with an addition of $118.2 million to address mental health programming among First Nation and Inuit peoples. This bill, C-375, is also inspired by another idea. Mr. Speaker, we believe that better is always possible. Bill C-375 will amend paragraph 721(3)(a) of the Criminal Code such that, unless specified, when a pre-sentencing report is required by a court, in addition to such information as age, maturity, character, behavior, and attitude, information outlining any mental health disorder, as well as any mental health care programs available for the accused be provided as part of their pre-sentencing report. I would like to take this opportunity to outline in detail why my colleagues in this House must support this essential bill to address mental health concerns in our criminal justice system. Currently, courts are not mandated to consider the mental health history of individuals in pre-sentencing proceedings. This significantly increases the likelihood that such vital information will not be taken into account during pre-sentencing, and that individuals with histories of mental health issues may not be afforded appropriate care, compassion, and treatment throughout the process of their rehabilitation. Mr. Speaker, what are the real-world consequences of this status quo? Mr. Speaker, pre-sentencing reports are a vital tool at the judge's disposal. 87% of the judges see pre-sentencing reports as important in giving much-needed analysis and advice on offenders' treatment needs. By and large, when a pre-sentencing report is present in a case, there is significantly higher likelihood that an offender will receive a community sentence as opposed to a custodial sentence. By stating plainly and unambiguously that mental health background and treatments option must be included in pre-sentencing report along with other background information, probation officers who are tasked with preparing these reports will have to work from a clear standard whereby the investigation of an offender's mental health background will be deemed at least as equal to other factors. Underlining this framework will be the ideal that such individuals with histories of mental illness are best approached for the model of what Justice Richard Schneider terms therapeutical jurisprudence. This is in contrast to traditional punitive approaches, seeks as a primary goal to limit offender recidivism with the court. Thus, this bill in many ways takes one further step towards the deinstitutionalization of mental health and one further step away from when mental health sufferers were subjected to mandatory and undignified confinement. Across Canada, individuals with mental illness find themselves involved in the criminal justice system under circumstances that are tragic and horrific, both for themselves and their victims. Many of the experts and advocates who I have spoken to on this subject agree that it requires a host of policy approaches to address. Bill C-375 is just one such approach to addressing mental health and criminal justice system. As a modest and uncontroversial step in the right direction, I extend my hand to all members from each caucus to work together with me on this important initiative. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I'm confident that with this small yet significant change to our criminal code, all members in this House will do their part in ensuring that those suffering from mental illness will be afforded the compassion and care they need and they deserve. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire, the Honourable Member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for his speech in presenting his bill. And I just wondered if he could expand perhaps on what his government is doing, what steps they're proposing to help people with mental illness stay out of the criminal system, and what steps they might be doing to help them move back into society, the real supports that these people need, that we need to support people with mental illness, treat it as a health issue, and help them stay out of the criminal courts and get back into society as well. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Richmond Hill.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Honourable Member for his question. Our government has been proactive on this matter, and the first step that the government took was introducing, and in our budget 2017, $5 billion over 10 years. And our government is working very closely with all the provinces and territories to ensure that that funds are properly allocated and it focuses on the services that are needed. Our government is also working collaboratively with provinces and territories to make sure that there are proper indicators and proper metrics are developed that they could be reported on collaboratively with the provinces and territories. As to the fact of what's being done at the correctional services, as I said in my speech, Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity with some of my colleagues to visit a number of correctional services, specifically the one I mentioned, as well as the one for youths which are sentenced under 2 years. And I saw firsthand the support that's given to the youths when in the process of their incarceration to be able to get rehabilitated. Unfortunately, because there is no consistency in our court during the pre-sentencing report that those services are highlighted and emphasized, it's case by case. We are fortunate that in the instance that I had the opportunity to visit the correctional services, most of the youth had individually identified their needs, and those were taken into account. With this bill, I'm hoping with the support of colleagues across the aisle and my colleagues from my caucus, for us to be able to make it mandatory for those services to be highlighted as part of the pre-sentence report, so those services will be considered to make sure that they're available for the member, for the individual that's going to be incarcerated. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Mississauga, Aaron Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I really commend my colleague for his great initiative, not just in presenting this private member's bill, but also in his very effective advocacy with respect to mental illness in his work in the All-Party Mental Health Caucus. My question to the member is to basically understand what kind of feedback he's received from stakeholders from across the country with respect to his private member's bill and whether they're in support of it. Thank you.
The honourable member for Richmond Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague once again for asking a great question and also once again seconding the bill today. This bill was inspired by my discussion with many experts and advocates in the mental health field. I met with many stakeholders through my work on Mental Health Caucus, as well as independently. We got a chance to get an overview of the gaps that's existing in the current system and how the shortcoming will be addressed. Notably, I would like to point out that this bill has support among the Canadian Bar Association, as well as many experts I've met with who deal with mental health on a day-to-day basis, such as clinical psychologists, correctional staff, and nurses have also expressed their desire to see changes in this bill. So, Mr. Speaker, I would like to say that there is a broad consent around the fact that we need to address this issue among many other issues. But this is an issue that's within the jurisdiction of the federal government, and this is something that we need to make sure we address to ensure those who are incarcerated during their incarceration process, they are afforded the programs to be able to make sure that they get integrated back into the community when their terms are over. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to rise to speak on Bill C-375, introduced by the honourable member for Richmond Hill, an act to amend the Criminal Code. More specifically, Bill C-375 seeks to amend Section 721 of the Criminal Code. Section 721 deals with pre-sentence reports, and what Bill C-375 would do is amend Section 721 to require that probation officers always, consistently in every pre-sentence report on any mental health disorder of an offender as well as report on programs and services related to mental health available to the offender. Let me say at the outset, Mr. Speaker, that there is no question that mental health is a serious issue in Canada's criminal justice system. We know that the percentage of individuals in prison who have mental health issues or addiction issues is very large. Indeed, according to the latest report from the Correctional Investigator of Canada, more than half of the female prison population has some mental health issue, and 26% of the male prison population has a mental health issue. So when we're talking about the criminal justice system, when we're talking about prisons and issues around mental health, we are talking about a very significant percentage of the prison population. And there's no doubt, and a lot of attention has been placed around issues around mental health in prisons as a result of some recent highly publicized incidents involving prisoners with mental health issues and how they were treated. And there's no question that there is plenty of work to do to ensure that the health and safety of prisoners with mental health issues who are behind bars are protected. And to that end, Parliament has a responsibility and a duty to act to ensure that those issues are addressed and to deal with shortcomings in terms of the federal prison system when dealing with persons with mental health issues. Now, with that said, Mr. Speaker, Bill C-375 specifically deals with pre-sentence reports. And I guess by way of background, each and every year in Canada there are thousands of pre-sentence reports that are prepared. Pre-sentence reports are not mandatory. They are prepared at the request of a judge who may need the report or look forward to the report to obtain additional information and background about the offender in order to craft an appropriate sentence for the offender. Now, Mr. Speaker, Section 721 of the Criminal Code provides that certain information must always be included in pre-sentence reports. Additionally, Section 721 sub 2 of the Criminal Code provides that provinces may, by regulation, require additional information be included in pre-sentence reports in their respective provinces. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, judges have the discretion to request that certain issues or certain matters are addressed in a pre-sentence report where the judge deems it appropriate, having regard for the unique circumstances of each individual offender. So the reality, Mr. Speaker, taken together is that when we're talking about issues around mental health that may concern an offender, when we're talking about issues around programs and services related to mental health in respect of offenders, the fact is that today that information, those issues can be addressed, can be investigated, and can be put forward in a pre-sentence report. And indeed, it is not uncommon, depending again upon the specific circumstances of each individual case and each individual offender, for judges to make that request and for judges to take those matters into consideration. And so, while I appreciate that Bill C-375 is a well-intentioned bill, and while I know that the honourable member for Richmond Hill has been a strong and passionate advocate around issues concerning mental health and vulnerable persons in Canadian society, I believe that Bill C-375 is unnecessary. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, I believe that in addition to being unnecessary, Bill C-375 has the potential to create confusion and result in unfairness and inconsistencies in the administration of justice. To that end, Mr. Speaker, there is a considerable variance in terms of the behaviors and conditions that fall under the umbrella of mental illness. The fact is that not all mental illnesses and mental disorders are the same. They, even within some disorders, the degree of impact can vary considerably. And in addition to that, Mr. Speaker, there is a real potential that the effect of Bill C-375 could cause delay and backlog, further backlog, in our criminal justice system, which is already backlogged. Further, Mr. Speaker, Bill C-375 will significantly increase the amount of work that a probation officer undertakes in preparing a pre-sentence report. That additional work may be necessary in many cases. But again, that is already done in those cases because by the time that a verdict is rendered and a judge gets to the sentencing part of a specific case, issues around mental health where it concerns the offender are almost certainly have been brought forward to the attention of the trial judge. And so rather than taking a one-size-fits-all approach that can create inconsistencies, that can lead to confusion, that can result in backlog, that can slow down the administration of justice, Mr. Speaker, I would submit that the best approach is to do what is taking place, and that is to leave it to the discretion of trial judges. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Reprise de débat. La députée de Hochelaga.
The honourable member for Hochelaga. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today to Bill C-375 from my colleague for Richmond Hill, which amends the Criminal Code. This bill has a single clause, and its objective is to provide more information on the accused's profile during the pre-sentence report, which will be used by the judge to determine the most appropriate sentence under the circumstances or decide if the accused should be absolved of any sentence. During the first reading of this bill by its sponsor, the member for Richmond Hill indicated that according to the bill, when a court requests a pre-sentence report, other than information such as age, maturity, character, behavior, attitude, and willingness to rehabilitate, this report should include the mental health difficulties that the delinquent may suffer from, as well as programs that could offer care. It is essential that this information be provided so that Canadians who have mental health issues may be able to be cared for with compassion and receive the treatment that they need throughout their entire rehabilitation. Bill C-375 indicates that subsection 721(3) of the Criminal Code is amended by adding the following after paragraph A. A1. Any mental disorder from which the offender suffers, as well as any mental health care programs available to them. The pre-sentence report is distributed to people who have a direct interest in the matter, namely judges, lawyers for the defense, the Crown attorneys, parole officers, the individual of the report, targeted by the report rather, or the facility where the sentence will be served. This report is specifically or rather especially used by the judge in order to allow them to determine the appropriate sentence and to inform the accused of services available that could be necessary to rehabilitate them. The New Democratic Party is determined to build a criminal justice system that works and to make sure that compassion and rehabilitation are at the heart of our policy. Asking for information regarding an individual's mental health to allow the judge to make a more informed decision on the appropriate sentence is directly in line with the idea of a justice system based on rehabilitation, such as including information on available mental health programs and services. The objective is not to reveal the mental condition of an individual or to perpetuate stigmatization or the false perception that people who have mental health problems are dangerous. The objective of this bill is to add information to the pre-sentence report in order to develop it to help the individual to receive an appropriate sentence and, with proposed amendments, to receive the services that they require. People who have mental health problems are overrepresented in the Canadian criminal justice system. Documenting the number of people found guilty of specific crimes who also have mental health problems would contribute to demonstrating the needs for programs and alternative solutions. This information could also be used to develop resources and initiatives that would prevent people suffering from mental health problems from being caught up in the criminal justice system in the first place. Although the legislation regarding pre-sentence reports, namely the Criminal Code, is a federal law, it's administered by provinces and territories. And provinces and territories do include different information in their pre-sentence reports. Some provinces, such as Nova Scotia, already recommend that mental health problems be disclosed, but that's not the case for all jurisdictions. This bill would create a national standard for all jurisdictions in order to take into account an individual's mental health when deciding on the sentence. Bill C-375 would require that the report contain information on mental health care programs that could be made available to the individual with the intent to rehabilitate. A study by the John Howard Society of Ontario reported in 2015, and I quote, and what I'm reading is a translation, since the closure of institutions serving individuals with mental illness and developmental disabilities, the criminal justice system has become a repository for individuals who lack adequate resources to cope with living in the community.
An annual report of the Correctional Investigator in 2012 showed that 36% of inmates in federal institutions were in need of psychological or psychiatric follow-up. Furthermore, 45% of male inmates and 69% of female inmates had received mental health services in their correctional institution. Young adults between the ages of 18 to 34-year-olds are overrepresented in correctional institutions, yet they only represent 28% of the Canadian adult population, according to 2015-2016 Statistics Canada data. An Ontario study also showed that 80% of young adults in custody have one mental health problem or another. In 2015-2016, Indigenous adults were also overrepresented in provincial and territorial correctional institutions. They represented 26% of the intakes, whereas they only represent 3% of the Canadian adult population. The overrepresentation of Indigenous adults was more pronounced amongst women than amongst men. Female Indigenous individuals represented 38% of women taken into custody after conviction in provinces and territories, whereas that number for men was 26%. In federal correctional services, Indigenous women represent 31% of women in detention after conviction or in custody after conviction, whereas males represent 23%. Mr. Speaker, there is a problem when someone is sent to prison with mental health issues and is not offered appropriate services. In last April, the Toronto Star reported this from Judge David Paciocco from the Court of Appeal of Ontario, and I quote,
Execution, conviction, sentencing, use of segregation, all stages of our criminal justice system are now consistently overrepresented by people who are suffering from psychosis, mania, mood disorders, depression, alcoholism and addiction, anxiety disorders, and personality disorders.
And the judge continues on to say,
suffering from mental health issues who are swallowed up by the criminal justice system do not fare well. The use of segregation or other standard isolation practices are the clearest example of a system whose practices rooted in punishment and control can exacerbate the challenges facing people with mental health issues. Individuals leaving the system can leave with unmanaged or worsened mental health issues, which can contribute to recidivism.
And that's exactly what we want to avoid. The New Democratic Party is committed to collaborating with community stakeholders, mental health professionals, frontline workers like the RCMP, and provincial and territorial justice systems in order to obtain better support services for those individuals suffering from mental illness. We also want to make sure that communities have the necessary, as I was saying, resources and services to help those suffering from a mental illness before and during their integration into the correctional system. We must continue to focus on compassionate care that helps people suffering from a mental illness to reintegrate into society after their incarceration and avoid to the greatest extent possible excessive criminalization. Mr. Speaker, the more we are able to assess the needs of individuals who are given a prison sentence, the more our justice system will be able to refocus on appropriate rehabilitation services and thus, in the best case scenario, eliminate the risk of reoffending. That is one of the reasons why the New Democratic Party wants pre-sentence reports to be more comprehensive, and that is why we will support this bill. A mental health illness can have an important impact on the life of an individual. The disclosure of mental health problems should be taken into account in choosing an appropriate sentence and a rehabilitation plan. Rather than engage in tough-on-crime rhetoric, the New Democrat Party has always focused on taking the necessary steps so that our justice system will actually work. Our goal is to help those found guilty who are suffering from mental health problems to be able to benefit from the necessary support and resources so that they can be rehabilitated and become full-fledged members of our society. We believe that it is important to offer all possible support services and resources to those suffering from mental health issues who are in the justice system. Thank you once again for allowing me to speak to this bill, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for St. Catharines.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's good to see you in the chair, Mr. Speaker. I hope you're enjoying your role as the neutral arbiter of this debate. It's good to see you in that role. Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to stand today and join in on the second reading debate on Private Members Bill C-375, an act to amend the Criminal Code. And before I begin my speech, I'd like to thank my honourable friend from Richmond Hill, who in caucus and throughout this Parliament has been a tireless advocate for mental health. This bill would amend provisions of the Criminal Code dealing with pre-sentence reports to be more responsive to offenders with mental health issues. A pre-sentence report is ordered in some cases to help the court learn more about the person being sentenced. Specifically, this bill would amend subsection 721(3) of the Criminal Code to provide that a pre-sentence report must, where available, and unless the court orders otherwise, contain information on any mental disorder from which the offender suffers, as well as any mental health care programs available to them. Requiring information about the offender's mental health disorder would be in addition to the information that the Criminal Code currently requires to be included in a pre-sentence report. Under the current law, a pre-sentence report must, wherever possible, contain certain information about the offender, such as age, maturity, character, and willingness to make amends. Bill C-375 would make it clear to the courts that where mental health information is readily available, it should be included in the pre-sentence report. For example, often an offender will provide information about their mental health situation to the probation officer who is preparing the report. The officer will often include this information in the report, which is in turn relied upon by the Crown, Defence Counsel, and the sentencing judge. The sponsor of the bill, the Honourable Member from Richmond Hill, has indicated that his intention of introducing this bill was to ensure that information outlining any mental health disorders, as well as any mental health care programs available, is before the court, to ensure that those offenders with histories of mental illness are afforded care and compassion, and they will receive appropriate treatment throughout the process of their rehabilitation. Mr. Speaker, I agree with the sponsor that this is an important information that can be extremely valuable to a sentencing judge. In fact, it's my understanding that criminal courts in Canada can and do consider the mental health information of offender when it's before them. Any sentence that is imposed without reference to available medical evidence, including mental health information, is vulnerable to attack on appeal. I do not read this proposal, however, as compelling an offender to provide information about their mental health situation against their wishes. I understand that including mental health information in the pre-sentence report is already common practice in many jurisdictions. The legal effect of Bill C-375 would serve to codify this practice and signal to sentencing judges that this information is relevant to their deliberations. Inroads are being made in recent years to eliminate the stigma around mental illness. People are more willing to talk about their struggles and their lives with a mental illness. This increased openness has led us to learn more about the scope of mental illness in Canada. The Mental Health Commission of Canada indicates that in any given year, 1 in 5 Canadians experience a mental health or addiction problem. Other statistics indicate that by the time Canadians reach 40 years of age, 1 in 2 experienced a mental illness. Additionally, we know our young people are more likely to experience mental health issues than any other group. It's well known that in the past decade, the number of individuals with mental health issues involved in the criminal justice system has increased. There's no singular reason for this increase. However, a number of causes have been cited for contributing factors. These include gaps in services for marginalized populations, including housing, income, and health services. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, I'm extremely proud to be part of a government that is making great strides in these areas. For instance, the recently announced National Housing Strategy. We also know that individuals with mental health illness are often likely to come to the attention of police and be arrested and detained. Once detained, accessing appropriate mental health services can be a challenge. Mr. Speaker, the complexities of this issue cannot all be addressed through a private member's bill, nor can the criminal code solve such a profound and complex social problem. However, I think it's fair to say that the sponsor's intent is to take one meaningful step in addressing the larger problem: the overrepresentation of the mentally ill in the criminal justice system. The bill proposes a narrow and targeted approach to ensure that in situations where a pre-sentence report is ordered, readily available mental health information is to be considered. The stated goals of the bill are consistent with the mandate given by the Prime Minister to the Minister of Justice, which asks her to address gaps in service to those with mental illness throughout the criminal justice system. Mr. Speaker, I think most Canadians would agree that the issue of mental illness could be better managed in the criminal justice system. It's an area where we must continue to work together with our provincial and territorial counterparts, as well as community stakeholders, to ensure meaningful progress is made. I want to be clear that improving the mental health responses of the criminal justice system is not about letting offenders off easy. On the contrary, it is consistent with our government's stated commitment to a criminal justice system that keeps communities safe, respects victims, and holds offenders to account. In particular, addressing mental health is one of the critical ways we can divert offenders from the so-called revolving door of incarceration, improve chances of successful reintegration, and make more efficient use of scarce resources. These outcomes, and not simply punitive measures, should drive our decision-making. As a result, Mr. Speaker, every step we take to improve outcomes for those with mental illness is a step worthy of careful consideration by parliamentarians. The proposals in this bill are also consistent with our government's other efforts to improve mental health more generally across the country. In Budget 2017, the government committed $5 billion over the next 10 years to the provinces and territories to improve access to mental health services. In addition to that, to ensure that federally sentenced offenders with mental health needs receive proper care. Budget 2017 proposed to invest $57.8 million over 5 years, starting in 2017-2018, and $13.6 million per year thereafter to expand mental health care for all inmates in federal correctional facilities. This funding is in addition to the $69 million over 3 years announced in 2016 for immediate mental health needs, and more than $300 million provided annually to support culturally relevant mental wellness services in Indigenous communities. These significant and historic investments in frontline mental health services will benefit all Canadians, not just those who find themselves at odds with the criminal justice system. I'm encouraged by these financial commitments. It reflects the importance of investing in upstream services to ensure that people can receive help when they need it before they come into contact with the criminal justice system. I look forward to hearing the rest of this debate on this important private member's bill. Safe and healthy communities are built upon a criminal justice system that treats all Canadians with respect, dignity, and in a manner that always upholds the rights and freedoms afforded to all Canadians by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I'd like to thank the sponsor of this bill, the Honourable Member for Richmond Hill, for providing us an opportunity to debate this important issue facing the criminal justice system. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I begin my speech, I want to recognize and express deep gratitude to someone who is a remarkable leader, a former minister who served as a Member of Parliament, my predecessor, the Honourable Rona Ambrose, who served the people of Sturgeon River Parkland with distinction. It's an honour to follow in her footsteps as the representative of Sturgeon River Parkland. I'm pleased to rise today to speak on Bill C-375, an act to amend the Criminal Code in regards to pre-sentencing reports. And I want to thank my honourable colleague from the member for Richmond Hill for his championing the issue of mental health in Canada. This bill would amend the Criminal Code to require a pre-sentencing report that contains information on a mental disorder from which an offender suffers. Canadians expect their justice system will keep them safe from high-risk individuals, and we need a policy that strikes a balance between the need to protect society from those who pose a danger and to treat those with mental illness and mental disorders with compassion. I won't be supporting this bill because I don't believe it achieves this balance between compassion for victims and their families and for the offenders who suffer from mental illness. Currently, Section 721 of the Criminal Code enables a probation officer to publish a pre-sentence report after the offender is found guilty. The purpose of this report is to assist the court in imposing a sentence or in determining whether an accused should be discharged. A pre-sentence report must contain the following information: the offender's age, maturity, character, willingness to make amends, and it also contains the history of previous dispositions under the Young Offenders Act and the history of alternative measures used to deal with the offender and the offender's response to those measures. C-375 proposes to add another requirement to this list: the consideration of any mental health disorder from which the offender suffers, as well as any mental health care programs available to them. This, in practice, will create some unfairness and inconsistencies in the application of laws and justice. Not all mental health disorders are the same. In fact, even the same mental health disorders can have a great deal of variance in how they impact the individual. And it is paramount that compassion for those suffering with mental health disorders be balanced with the need to protect public safety and provide justice for victims and their families. I also believe that these changes are concerning because they could add considerable delays to our court system that is already overburdened. Increased delays and complexity will not help those in the justice system with mental health disorders, nor will it be good for victims and their families. And I don't think any of my colleagues in this House would want trials to be unnecessarily delayed or after the fact, and I believe this legislation could add delays to our system. Our understanding of mental health continues to evolve with more research. It's an incredibly complex issue, as I mentioned before, and there is a danger when anyone attempts to address mental health too broadly. And the requirement of this bill to add pre-sentencing reports for mental disorders is too broad. As I said, not all mental health disorders are the same, and not all of them have the same relevance in our justice system. Currently, judges are able to take into account relevant information to ensure that the mentally ill are not treated poorly and that this legislation will not be cumbersome to the system. I also feel that, looking at the case in Manitoba of Vince Lee, who I believe the justice system dealt quite ably with in showing compassion to the offender, but also showing compassion for the victims and their families, it shows that the system is largely working well. And I believe that this legislation could further tip the balance too far into the favor of the accused against the victims and their families. Another danger in this change is that the broad definition could be applied to something that is very different from the sorts of illnesses that have been considered relevant in past cases. For example, it's increasingly becoming aware that hard drug addictions can be considered a mental illness. But do we really want drug addicts to be using their addictions as an excuse for committing crimes? For the law to maintain the confidence of Canadians, it must be consistently applied. Sentence exceptions for mental health disorders could create an incentive for the accused to claim that they have a mental disorder. Like all Canadians, we hope for the successful rehabilitation of those who have taken up a life of crime. Our first priority, however, must be the safety and security of Canadians and the communities where we work and live. It is well known that an increasing number of people who have become involved in the criminal justice system have mental health disorders. These individuals pose unique challenges for police, our courts, correctional facilities, and our social rights workers. In closing, I think that any justice bill must balance the right of the public to be adequately protected when those who suffer from mental illness pose a danger to society, with the rights of those suffering from the mental illnesses to be treated appropriately and with compassion. Thank you.
Resuming debate. The honourable member for Mississauga Lakeshore.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to join the second reading debate on Private Members Bill C-375, an act to amend the Criminal Code pre-sentence reports. This bill seeks to address the issue of mental health, Mr. Speaker, in the criminal justice system through a targeted amendment to the Criminal Code provision governing pre-sentence reports. Specifically, the bill would clarify that a pre-sentence report should, where possible, contain information about any mental disorder from which an offender suffers, as well as any mental health care programs available to them. Mr. Speaker, I'm in full agreement with the sponsor on the fact that the issue of mental health is of great concern to the criminal justice system. It has been identified as a key concern by many criminal justice stakeholders over the years. As part of our commitment to broadly review the criminal justice system in Canada, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Justice has indicated that addressing the needs of vulnerable offender populations in the criminal justice system is a key priority. Addressing the issue of mental health is also part of the Minister of Justice's mandate letter from the Prime Minister. Specifically, her mandate directs her to address gaps in services for those with mental illness throughout the criminal justice system. The issue of mental health has arisen numerous times so far in the course of the Minister's criminal justice review. It was raised by experts and other community stakeholders at the series of criminal justice roundtables hosted by the Minister of Justice throughout Canada over the past 2 years. This thorough consultative process, Mr. Speaker, included a total of 20 roundtables with at least one in every province and territory. Mental health professionals, as well as representatives from traditionally marginalized communities, including Indigenous and other racialized populations, featured prominently amongst the participants. The roundtable held in Vancouver in August 2016 was explicitly focused on mental health. At that event, our government heard in no uncertain terms that our criminal justice system must do a better job at responding to mental illness. Experts in the field, as well as those with first-hand criminal justice experience, explained that addressing mental health is one of the critical ways our government can reduce crime, and in doing so, create safer and more prosperous communities throughout Canada. Mr. Speaker, not only must we recognize mental health issues amongst those already involved in the criminal justice system, but by improving the mental health of our citizens before they engage in criminal behavior, we can prevent longer-term struggles which ultimately deprive our society of the full potential of those people. The idea is borne out in many of the stories and first-hand accounts that we have heard from Canadians throughout the roundtable process. A typical story, one that is all too often true in our society, Mr. Speaker, frequently begins with a young person from a marginalized community. That person will experience symptoms of mental distress, often beginning with depression or anxiety, but they will go unnoticed because of a lack of institutional capacity or social support. The young person's mental state will deteriorate, leading to lower performance at school, social withdrawal, and poor decision-making. The person's first involvement with the criminal justice system often is pursuant to a minor offense, such as a low-value theft or mischief. Nevertheless, he or she is convicted and most likely on a second offense is sentenced to a short period in custody. At this stage, Mr. Speaker, the system fails to recognize the presence of worsening mental illness. Once inside the criminal justice system, the youth is exposed to an environment which aggravates rather than treats their mental health and identifies with older, more serious offenders. Upon returning to the community, the young person now suffers from a worsening, untreated mental illness and lacks the tools to effectively reintegrate. The unfortunate reality is that this person is now far more likely to reoffend and to live a life of continued criminal behavior. Mr. Speaker, this story should not surprise any member of this House. And while it is merely an example, our experience, including that gained through our own government's consultation process, has shown that this type of scenario continues to present itself in Canadian society. It is because of stories like these that I commend the sponsor for his commitment to addressing mental health in the criminal justice system through Bill C-375. As I read the proposal, it would essentially codify the current practice of including mental health information in a pre-sentence report where that information is readily available. In my view, Mr. Speaker, this bill would not compel the offender to provide information about their mental health situation against their wishes, nor would it provide the court with the power to order the production of mental health records or empower them to order an assessment of the mental condition of the offender. Mr. Speaker, I understand that it is already common practice in many jurisdictions for the offender to provide information about their mental health to a probation officer where they feel it is beneficial to them. Therefore, in my view, the practical result of this bill would be to signal to a sentencing judge that this information is a relevant consideration at sentencing. As I was reviewing the bill, I considered how such a proposal might fit within the broader goals and mandate of the Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, the criminal justice system must protect all Canadians and keep our communities safe, but it must also protect the rights of all Canadians. Our government is committed to ensuring that the criminal law meets the highest standards of equity, fairness, and respect for the rule of law. Healthy and safe communities are built upon a criminal justice system that treats the individuals with whom it interacts with respect, dignity, and in a manner that always upholds the rights and freedoms afforded to all by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Mr. Speaker. I think such a proposal could be seen as complementing our government's broader objectives of improving access to mental health care services for all Canadians. For example, Mr. Speaker, as members of this House will know, our government made a historic investment in mental health in Budget 2017. $11 billion of federal money is being transferred to the provinces and territories over the next 10 years, almost half of which is to be dedicated to improving access to mental health and addiction services. In addition, Mr. Speaker, Budget 2017 committed $118.2 million over 5 years to improve mental health supports for First Nations and also for Inuit peoples. This money will be provided directly to communities so that they can specifically tailor programs to meet their individual needs. This funding, Mr. Speaker, is in addition to the $69 million over 3 years announced in 2016 for immediate mental health needs and the more than $300 million provided annually to support culturally relevant mental wellness services for Canada's Indigenous communities. These, Mr. Speaker, are significant and historical investments in frontline mental health services, and they will benefit all Canadians, not just those who find themselves at odds with the criminal justice system. These upstream investments in mental health services could prevent a mentally ill person from coming into contact with the criminal justice system in the first place. Investing resources in our currently saturated mental health care system could decrease the likelihood that the criminal justice system becomes the default method of dealing with these individuals, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to just briefly reflect on the communication I had with members of my own community, my riding of Mississauga Lakeshore constituents, who have repeatedly written to me on the importance of mental health in Canada, particularly with respect to young people, with our Indigenous communities, increasingly also with our seniors. And they underscore in their correspondence to me, Mr. Speaker, the importance for the government and for all parliamentarians to take mental health seriously, to integrate mental health systematically into our policy decision-making processes, and to backstop the need to invest in mental health with adequate resources and investments, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank the sponsor again for the step he took in introducing this bill into the House of Commons, and through his own framework, his own lens of criminal justice and its intersection with mental health needs in Canada, move the yardstick forward. Mr. Speaker, thank you again for the opportunity to discuss this important proposal, and I look forward to continued debate on this important private member's bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Avant que je reconnaisse la députée.
The Honourable Member for Avignon Métis Matapédia, I must inform him that he has 2 minutes, and there will be more time available when the House resumes. The Honourable Member. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his excellent speech. And as he pointed out, this bill, C-375, is an act to amend one of the paragraphs of the Criminal Code. Now, so it has to do with information on any mental issues and any problems to do with mental health. As you know, Mr. Speaker, our government recognizes that the criminal justice system has to come up with better answers, better responses to mental health issues. The government has committed $5 million over 5 years to help provinces and territories to make sure that mental health, there is more mental health treatment. So we want to review the entire criminal justice system, and this includes a complete review in order to identify the needs of those with mental health issues and in order to improve services. By recognizing the needs of offenders with these problems, we want to help to lower the rate of reoffense. These measures would help people with mental illness in the criminal justice system. According to Correctional Services Canada, more than 70% of offenders under federal responsibility and more than half of those who are serving a federal sentence have mental issue problems. So, Mr. Speaker, you're saying I should finish? All right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member will have 8 minutes for his speech. When the House resumes the debate on this motion, the time for private members' business is now expired and will fall to the bottom of the precedents.
Adjourned until Monday at 11 a.m. pursuant to Standing Order 24-1.